Introducing Portraits and Ideas. I'm Earl Gal presenting interviews to inspire and perhaps unveil something new in the realm of ideas. So, what is your name and nationality?
James Alexander Blakely Lockhart. I am an African American, otherwise known as a Negro in the old days, and before that, colored.
What is your profession, or what was your profession?
Corporate executive and lawyer.
So, how did you reach the position you reached when you reached the pinnacle of your profession? And what was your educational background that led to that pinnacle of professional excellence?
I studied undergraduate business and got a degree in business management and business administration, to be exact, at Boston University, and graduated from there and went on to Boston University Law School. And I practiced law briefly in South Carolina, very briefly, because I was drafted in the military and assigned to the Fifth Army headquarters in Chicago, where I was a member of the Judge Advocate General's Corps as a lawyer, and I was in the civil division, contracts, reviews, and those sorts of things. And then I quickly became the attorney advisor to the commanding general, a three-star general who commanded the Fifth Army Corps. And that kind of ticked off my boss, because I was new to the office. He wanted me sitting at a desk right next to him as a junior. So I had an interesting experience there, and I think I learned more because I dealt more with high-level executive decisions and made opinions based on those. And of course, in the military you learn a very specialized kind of law, because the Uniform Code of Military Justice is very different from civil law. And there are similarities, but there are uniqueness because of the structure of the military. And
Could you speak up a little louder for the background noise?
oh, okay.
Yeah.
Then I wanted to go back to New York, where I was born, to practice law. But I had since married, and I married a girl from Georgia whose mother also lived in New York. And actually we met in New York because our parents put us together. And we liked Chicago. While I was in the military, I did something that I don't mind saying, it should be bashful, but I violated the federal law. I got out very active. Fifth Army headquarters, first let me say, was located at an ideal civil life, 50th and the Lake Shore Drive in Chicago. High-end, University of Chicago area, and that area was very liberal at the time. Still is, I imagine. But I was highly interested in politics. So there was a guy who was an alderman in Chicago named Paul Douglas, and he wanted to run for United States Senate. And I had managed to get involved in Fifth Ward politics, which covered the area of Hyde Park where I lived and where the Army headquarters was and where the university was located. Transferred over to Budget Rent-A-Cars, executive vice president, and we kept up the relationship, and he decided that they needed to have an in-staff law department, and that's when I transferred to Budget. Tried that as an experiment, basically. I planned on staying there a couple of years and hopefully gaining them as a major client and going back to my law firm. But having never been anywhere and done anything outside of South Carolina and Massachusetts, I was now with Budget flying all over the world and negotiating deals in the Caribbean and South America and in Europe, and at first-class level travel, and I got excited by it. So it was very adventurous, and I loved it. And of course, I was making a lot more money than I was in my law firm, where I was just eking out a living. And so I said, well, I'll stay a little longer. And one thing led to another. I was there for 3 or 4 years and 5 years. And Then I brought a major lawsuit against our competitors to move our airport operations inside the terminals, and many people hadn't done anything about it, but they were aware that Hertz Avis International car rental companies, they were the giants in the industry in those days, had designed a contract which airports agreed to, and they shouldn't have, but they did. And it said there shall be no other car rental company in the airport except for Hertz Avis International. And that was a clear violation of federal law, restraint of trade, and an antitrust violation. And that's what I brought against the three of them and the airports. And I brought an action on behalf of my company, Budget Rent-A-Car Corporation, and its licensees, all of them. And we didn't have to go to trial on that. We did a lot of preliminary trial work, but I had them by the jugular, so to speak. And
They settled out of court.
in 3 years, I got a settlement. When it started out, the Transamerica directors and officers asked me how much would it cost to fund this thing. And I said $1 million. And my boss, the CEO of Budget, said, "You've got to be crazy. We're not going to fund that." Well, when I walked out of that boardroom, they funded it. He said, "Well, you better win this one." And so that was a lot of pressure. But in 3 years, I brought a check for $10 million settlement.
Whoa.
And the whole idea was not so much the money as it was getting
the business option.
getting into airports. So all the
Right.
airports decided they were wrong and they needed to open the doors. And by then I knew most of the airport directors around the country. I knew a lot of blacks who had come into being as heads of city councils in major cities, which were over the airports, their management. And then black mayors were coming into prominence. So I had a lot of connections, and therefore we got Budget in all the airports pretty rapidly after that. As a result of that success, Transamerica asked me to move to the holding company, the headquarters in San Francisco. And that's how I wound up in San Francisco. And I worked there as VP Public Affairs, which really is over the governmental relations function and all its lobbying. And I was also over its external activities, meaning charitable contributions. I developed a corporate foundation while I was there. They sold the company, and I said, "What are you going to do with all the profits?" Usual thing, plow them back into the company. So why don't we start with plowing a few into a new foundation? And so we got them to give us $50 million for the Transamerica Foundation, which we created. And that's basically what I did.
And so what are some of the things the foundation has done?
The foundation did, well, it's the first time a major corporation in San Francisco funded in a diverse way. It had naturally a diversification program when I got involved. So we did funding for lots of dinners and fundraisers for Latinos, for blacks, and on and on. Those were new avenues for the corporation.
Mm-hmm. Open up a whole new realm of them, especially for their community commitment. Right.
And my biggest job was the public affairs arena, governmental relations. And you met Vernon Jordan. You saw him the other day, and Vernon was with a major law firm in Washington. And he will tell you today that I'm the first black lawyer, general counsel in any company that ever brought him business. And he will acknowledge that today. He say, "This man is the first man that had the guts to send a black man business out of a major corporation."
Amazing, amazing.
Yeah.
So going back up a little bit to the suit with Budget, did you have a large staff to help you?
I had a
pursue
very
that
small
case?
staff,
Uh-huh.
but we depended primarily on outside counsel. So I had a number of law firms who were specialists in their fields, trademarks and patents,
Right.
contracts, litigation, antitrust litigation. So I hired a firm in New York which specialized in and had been successful in antitrust. And there was a lawyer named Louis Nizer. He was a very famous man in New York, nationally as one of America's great trial lawyers. And he had a very large staff. who functioned in the antitrust area.
Mm-hmm.
So we hired them. They were very good. As a matter of fact, they came up with the first use and application of the computer knowledge and technology to figure out which federal circuit, which federal district the lawsuit should be filed in, because we'd probably get the most favorable treatment.
Right.
And that's a key
Key
component
strategy.
of
Key
bringing-
strategy.
Yeah.
Right. Right.
And they selected the Ninth Circuit, which is the West Coast,
Mm-hmm.
and they selected the District of San Francisco, which was easier for us because that's where we were headquartered.
Right.
And
right.
we happened to get the only judge that had ever ruled favorably in a case similar to ours, and we got assigned to him. And that of course is by lot.
Right. Right. It's
Not
a
by
it's a
design.
random thing.
Yeah. Naturally,
So
the lawyers made a joke about it and said that I had fixed the case.
Right. But it was only the luck of the draw,
Yeah,
you know.
yeah.
You guys are really, things sort of lined up,
Yeah.
step by step.
And that's also very important in life.
Absolutely, in any career, you know.
Yeah.
Was Transamerica, is it a Fortune 500 company?
Transamerica was. As a matter of fact, Transamerica, when I was with them, was the 89th largest company in America,
Okay.
and the fourth largest financial services company. We were a diversified financial service company. We had all phases of life insurance,
Mm-hmm.
health insurance, property, casualty insurance, title insurance, anything you could think of, we had it. We had finance companies that did consumer lending, corporate lending, commercial lending. We were exceedingly diversified. We had car rental companies, we had an airline, Transamerica Airlines, we had hotels, the Chico Hotels, which were international. We had United Artists Entertainment,
Oh yeah,
movie company,
movies.
United Artists Records, a music company. We had a film developing company. We had a manufacturing company, De Laval Manufacturing, which manufactured big turbines, headquartered in New York and purchased New York, right where IBM was headquartered. We had a total diverse environment, and we had it because the guy who, in modern times, built Transamerica was a guy named Jack Beckett, who had been with McKinsey and Company, the largest consulting
Consulting firm,
corporate
consulting
management
firm.
firm
Right.
in that time.
Right.
And he bought the theory of a guy named James, or Jimmy Ling, as he was known, and who had built a company in Texas called Ling Temco About. It was three companies he merged together, manufacturing companies. And Jimmy Ling had spread the management theory that it's better to diversify your companies so that you don't have extraordinary losses anymore, but you, by the same token, don't have extraordinary gains, but you survive and you continue to go up and you have a healthy company. Well, Beckett bought that theory. Well, we bought it and we found out we couldn't manage it. So we essentially went back to a financial services company and sold off all these exotic companies that didn't match what we were basically doing.
The core business model.
Core business model. That's
Right.
exactly right.
Right.
Yeah.
So it would be, in a way, before that, it was be more like Berkshire Hathaway, which has that
Yes,
huge diversity.
exactly.
Right.
That's exactly right. Now, Warren Buffett, of course, still believes in return on equity, and he doesn't care what the company does. If he sees a future opportunity, that the company has potential growth, it may be in trouble now, and that's particularly when he pounces on it.
Right. When he
Gets
buys.
it, gets it when its earnings are low, when its returns are low, and he says you take the company and for 2 or 3 years or 4, you rebuild it, restructure it, and the returns will improve, and then you either keep it or sell it.
Adios, Jim.
All right,
Bye.
Rick, thank you.
Yeah. So one of the reasons I'm asking about the size of the company, at that point when you were appointed VP for Public Relations, how many Fortune 500 companies would have African Americans at the level in which you were?
There were very few, but they were beginning to
Mhm.
do so. I mean, the large corporations in New York,
The year you were appointed VP was what?
1979.
Okay.
Yeah, I had been vice president, general counsel at budget,
Right.
and then I was promoted to senior vice president, and before I left, I got the transfer to VP. There were quite a number of companies in that period where I got appointed. They were doing the same thing. They were diversifying they recognized corporate relations, public affairs, community relations, and human resources, which is where we all were basically at that time.
Mm-hmm.
Of course, we know that we progressed from there to operations now, which is really where the action is.
What is the relative advantage of hard work versus high intelligence in being successful in the type of work that you've done?
Well, I think they both work together, but I learned a lesson from George Lawrence, where I talked about earlier, about hard work. And the one thing I learned about it is if you work for somebody, you never let them see you come to work, but never let them see you leave work. And so my CEO lived outside of town in a suburb.
Is that advice he gave you?
Yes.
Uh-huh.
And
That's really
so
powerful. That's powerful.
when I went to budget, I watched what Morris Bellsberg did. My CEO, and his office was right next door to mine. And I found out what time he came in, so I was always in the office when he arrived. So when he walked in the office, there was nobody there but me, and he'd say, "Hi, Lockie," and go on, wave, and go on to his office. But he knew I was there.
Right.
He knew I was working.
That left an
And
ongoing
when
impression.
he left in the evenings, he always said, "Goodbye, Lockie." So his mind was, that man's working,
Yeah.
and other people are not.
Right.
And
Right.
so-
That became an embedded
Yeah.
conception about you,
Yeah.
in his mind,
And I noticed when I got there was another young exec who was a VP, and he was quickly promoted to executive vice president. He lived in the suburbs too, and he obviously came in early to avoid the traffic, but he said the same thing.
Mm-hmm.
He wanted Morris to know that he was there
Yeah.
a full day
Right.
and working hard.
Right.
We had no hours. We worked 7 days a week.
Right.
We worked in the office on Saturdays, Sundays, and frequently went to the North Shore suburbs to my CEO's house, where we sat around for 2 and 3 hours on Sundays and did management analysis and digest the kick strategies around and things. We worked. I never knew anything but work, frankly.
So you were looking at 80 hours a week scenarios, right?
Easily.
Yeah.
Easily.
Yeah. Right.
When I wasn't working, I was on an airplane,
Uh-huh.
flying to some city to negotiate a contract to sell or buy a budget franchise,
Right.
which is basically a company, car rental company.
Mm-hmm.
Fleet of cars and rights to a territory.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
I notice, in many foreign countries I've gone, I've seen budget everywhere.
Yeah.
So, what advice would you give to those who might want to pursue your profession in law? And what would you consider the secrets of success? I know you mentioned this work strategy of being there before anybody else
Yeah.
and leaving after. In addition to that, what advice would you give those who want to pursue law?
Well, today is a wholly different environment. Almost anybody has an opportunity to succeed at levels that far beyond where.
Secrets of success in the law profession, based on your lengthy experience doing a variety of things in the profession.
Yeah, and we were talking about the need to work hard,
Right.
diligently,
Mm-hmm.
but you also got to be smart and clever. Use your wits about you. But that's taken for granted because most people who get a good education have a pretty good mind.
Correct. To get through law school,
Yes.
you have to have.
That's right.
Yeah, you have to have that. Yeah.
And a good deal of life is having some good connections too. Seeing the right people.
Social networking.
Yeah.
Building a network of.
I would have never gotten through law school or college, frankly, if it hadn't been for the good fortune of my father basically firing me and saying your production in the first year in college is not good. I think you need to go out of college and get a job and work for a while. Of course, I rejected that advice, and I hit the pavement and went up and down Beacon Street and Bay State Road and right there off campus of BU, and I found this Jewish psychiatrist who was setting up. He had just bought this brand new brownstone, four-story brownstone, with 3 stories with a basement, and not far from my dormitory, and which I was being kicked out of because I couldn't live there anymore because I couldn't afford it. And he agreed to hire me to clean his offices, and he said, "Do you know about cleaning?" I said, "Oh, yes, I do." And it's like a woman and Gone with the Wind. And so he said, "You sure?" I said, "Yes, sir." And he said, "Can you clean these apartments?" I said, "Yes." "Your office?" "Yep, I can do all that." So he said, "Okay." So he hired me. I didn't know anything about cleaning, you know.
I didn't see it coming down.
So I learned a lot. His sister was almost like his wife. She did all the shopping once a week, you know, for grocery and everything. Stocked the kitchen, had his laundry taken out and taken care of. And she got to know me, of course, but she basically gave me advice. She knew that I didn't know what I was doing. She'd tell me what to do, and she'd buy the right products and tell me how to use them, you know, for cleaning. And so I learned a lot. Mm-hmm. And I went to him immediately and I said, "Dr. Lando," I hadn't been there more than a week or so. I said, "I have a problem, and I have no money, and I got to stay in school." And he said, "What are you planning to do?" And I went through the whole scenario with him. And he said, "What do you want?" And I said, "I need funding for my tuition for the first semester in the summer course." And he advanced it for me. He said, "I'm going to trust you. I like you. I think you're going to make it. And just keep your head in the books, and don't bring any girls in the apartment downstairs. I'm going to let you have an apartment. You can stay here." And he said, "First, I'm not going to give you a key to your front door. You're going to have to come up through the building so I can keep security." Well, his sister eventually gave me a key so I could bring my girlfriend over. But we had to be very quiet, you know. He said, "No parties, no guests, no girls." You know how long that was on. But Dr. Lando gave me that opportunity. So that gave me the opportunity to stay in school. And my dad had dropped all support. My mother couldn't. She wasn't capable of it at that time. And so I finished undergrad school. I did 2 years work in 3. I did 3 years work in 2 years by going full summers and picking up an extra semester for the 3rd year. So that got me qualified to enter the law school on a 3-and-3 program. You finish 3 years successfully in undergrad school, and you finish your first year law school year successfully.
As your senior year.
It will count toward your 4th year undergrad, and you can successfully stay in law school. So I did that, managed to get through. So I did, therefore, instead of 6 years, I did my undergrad in law in 5 years. But I had to go full summers. I couldn't afford not to be in law school.
Undergrad and law in 5. Boy, that's really moving fast.
Yeah. Well, I was always in a hurry.
Yeah. And also, you were, you know, astute enough to like find out about the possibility of doing those things.
Yeah.
Because those weren't normal routes for folks, you know.
Yeah.
That's really, I think that's the kind of advice that would be very pertinent for anyone, that to really seek out unusual opportunities that are not necessarily on the books, you know.
What was interesting, as an aside, is that Martin Luther King was doing his graduate theological work at Boston University Theology School at the same time. So when I graduated from undergrad school, he got his master's in theology, and then he got his, he delivered the commencement address because he'd just gotten his, I don't think it was the Nobel Peace Prize by then. That was '57.
No, that was not until
But-
'64 that he
yeah.
got the prize.
But he was highly regarded for leading, you know,
The Montgomery bus
Montgomery,
right.
yeah.
And so he came back as a
Right. As a
as
celebrity.
as an alumnus of note.
Yeah. And when he finished, he continued to study there because he got his doctorate. And he got his doctorate on the same commencement when I graduated from law school. And he therefore delivered the baccalaureate at the law school graduation.
Oh, wow.
That naturally, my parents were totally rewarded. They were so happy
Right,
to
right.
be there when he was delivering the baccalaureate and graduating. Yeah.
Fantastic.
That was just an aside.
That was in a very, in a way, a historic graduation. You know, given the impact that King has made, you know, consequent to
Yeah.
that. You know. So, any more thoughts for others who might want to pursue law?
Well, the nice thing about law is that it makes you very versatile. You have an opportunity to later decide what to
Focus on.
Focus on something else if you want to, and you can do almost anything. The law trains you to be better organized, to be more logical in your thinking, and to articulate your thoughts very clearly. So it's a training that's good for many avenues. Many corporate executives have law degrees who never practice law,
Right.
but use it like many people who take engineering degrees.
Right.
and-
Same
and
thing.
don't become
Right.
engineers.
So it becomes a platform.
Yes.
For actually shifting your focus in many different directions. Yeah.
But I think it's one of the things that the two disciplines do is they teach you how to organize your thoughts and your memory, and they teach you logic and how to focus.
Sure.
Yeah. Well, you know that from your
Yeah.
own
That
dental school.
that came out of you know, some of the science studies. What obstacles did you overcome to reach your professional goals? Were those obstacles internal or external?
Poverty was one.
Give examples. Poverty.
Well, my dad cut me off. I was,
Right,
I was
right.
in abject poverty there.
Right,
I had
right.
not a dime.
Financial distress.
Yeah. Before I ran into, as I alluded to earlier, Dr. Lando, that summer I slept on a fire escape. I had a buddy who I knew from Palma, who was at BU and had dropped out to do other things, and who loved to party, and he had a efficiency apartment. So when he had guests, of course I couldn't be there, so I went and bought a long extension cord and a lamp, and I put it outside on the fire escape, and he gave me a pillow and a few things. I used to sleep out there in the summertime and study and everything.
Amazing.
Yeah. And
So you would say that would be the toughest period in your educational?
yeah, it was a tough time. It was a really tough time.
'Cause,
Yeah.
I mean, for you to be walking up and down Beacon and so on and looking for a job, boy, and wondering whether you're going to be able to stay in school, because those folks were unforgiving in those schools in those days. If you didn't come up with the cash, you weren't in
That's
there.
right. That's exactly right.
And for that guy, for you to luck out on that guy who, you know, actually advanced the funds for you, it's like a really stroke of good luck.
That
you know?
was a big stroke. Yes.
So did you ever have any problems with motivation, or that was always there, and that was something that you got at a young age?
I think I had motivation because our family was motivated in everything. They were aggressive. I don't recall our family sitting down in anything. They were always had ideas about things they wanted to develop. Your father had to build an agency and a business. Your uncle had to build a practice and build a nightclub, a business. His father had to build a big farm. He was an important farmer in those days in various segments of agriculture. My father ran away from home because he didn't want to do farming work, and he did all kinds of menial labor. He was a valet and a chauffeur for a while, and then he worked in a laundry in New York, and then he worked as a clerk in the General Post Office in New York. And that's pretty menial stuff, just moving mail around and organizing it and all those sort of things, which he did all his life. My mother was a beautician, cosmetologist, excuse me, and set up a restaurant for her brother, my uncle, when he was ill and was recovering. And he was a chef at a restaurant in Tampa, and she brought him back. He recovered and took over the restaurant. And then she also developed a dry cleaners for her husband, my stepfather, to work in. So she was always working.
Mm-hmm.
And even when she was working, with no hours to have spare, she was appointed the Black State Easter Seals chairman, or the Heart Association, whatever. And she would take those things on because it gave her exposure to travel around the state and make speeches
Mm-hmm.
and get her name out there, and people knew her. And that's how she became president of the South Carolina Cosmetologists and Beauticians Association.
So you're suggesting that there's a whole family tradition
Of work,
of
hard
hard work,
dedication, yes, and achievement.
pursuance of excellence and
Exactly.
achievement. Right. What would you say would be the greatest achievement that you've made in your professional career, if you look back on it? You know, or maybe more than one achievement that you really look back with a lot of pride. You mentioned the case that you won
Yeah.
for budget as one.
Well, I don't know. I think the work I did in the inner city, the volunteer time I spent restructuring the Bay Area, San Francisco, Oakland, Urban League. I spent a lot of years on it, about 10 or 12. I chaired it about 3 times, for 3 and 4 years.
The board of the Urban League?
Of the Urban League.
Mhm.
And that I thought was the most satisfying and the most beneficial, had the largest outreach.
Affected more people and so
Yeah,
on.
and I really enjoyed doing that.
Mhm. So that was that's actually a future question as well about volunteer work, but we'll get into that later. What would you say would be, although you are retired now, what would you say are your future goals in general? And have you written them down?
Well, my future goals are fairly simplistic. After a lot of years of work, I want to sit back and relax, and that's what I've been doing, and enjoying my grandchildren, and spending time with them as much as possible, and the family. And that's really what I principally want to do. And I'm battling several medical issues, and my wife is too, so we have to focus on ourselves to some degree, be a little selfish right now, which takes me away from doing a lot of external stuff. And I'm giving up a lot of things that I'm involved in just because of that.
Mm-hmm.
It's just, you get older and older, and you mature, and time to move on, Yeah, as life goes on. So I got to focus on my family right now.
Right. So that's a very powerful
Yeah.
goal of focusing on family.
Yeah, my grandchildren principally,
And-
see
right.
that they get a good education,
Mm-hmm.
guide them through, be sure that they don't drop out. I mean, that's the biggest
Right.
problem society faces
Right,
now,
right.
kids who drop out of
Sure.
the
Sure.
I mean, there's nothing you can do successfully in this world
Mhm.
without a decent education
Right.
at some level.
Right. So that, with that focus on family, then that really brings out your role as a mentor, not only to your immediate family, but to many people around you, because you are one of the bright stars in our family, and you have a lot of experience that we all can learn from. So just sitting down having a conversation in the family is educational for all of us.
That's interesting because I've written my biography, and it stops pretty much where you would guess it would stop. At the end of my corporate career, my employment.
Transamerica.
And I find it hard to build anything of interest in that afterwards.
Mm-hmm.
And it seems that that when you grow up in this world, your existence is your job,
Right.
your profession.
Identity.
Yeah.
Your identity
Yeah.
is linked so strongly to your work. Yeah.
So, I sat around for months and trying to think, now, what do I talk about now? I mean, I can talk about the little civic work we do and the boards we serve on and those kind of, but we've been doing that our whole life.
But a good thing is that you could start writing about is your experiences traveling, and
Yeah.
and going, living, and your the people you know very well around Martha's Vineyard and Fort Lauderdale. So there's a lot of stuff.
I often wanted to go back and flesh out my biography by talking about specific incidences in my work and my travel, but I have not a great memory, and I need to go back and dig in my files.
There you go.
And that's a lot of work.
Yeah, I got a
Notes.
garage full of stuff that
Yeah.
I've been sort of meandering through and finding stuff that I forgot totally.
And I got all these boxes around my desk, and they're sitting under the desk, on the side of the desk. And they got all kinds of memorabilia, which triggers your
for
memory.
Scrapbook type
Yeah.
stuff. Yeah, right,
and,
right.
Plaques and awards and when I was traveling abroad a lot,
Right.
dedicating ships in this
Right,
place
right.
in Korea, or that place in China.
Wow.
And I can talk about some of those things, and some of them have some interesting aspects, but it takes time to go back and do all
And
that.
pull it together.
Yeah.
So, but the point is, even just sitting around over the last few days, and you've told several stories that are very interesting, vignettes.
Yeah.
That a lot of people would be very intrigued by. And so those are things that you could sort of add to that.
Yeah.
Transamerica retirement chapter.
Right.
And start building those other chapters. And these are some of the things that you might put in there. Some of the things I might ask you about here. Like, for example, describe a typical working day in your profession. Now, obviously, in your different positions, those working days were different, but just give me sort of a blend.
Let me tell you something funny. That's interesting you should say that.
Okay, you got this again, right? These guys.
You want to cut it off?
Yeah.
He moved to Georgia. He's built a house. And so in those days, our vacations, it was still segregation to some degree. And the country was changing. But we generally, people who grew up in my era went home for the holidays, for their vacations. And so I was home, and kids were there, and Dad and I were sitting on the back porch, and evening after dinner talking, and eating parched peanuts and stuff. And he said, what is it exactly that you do? And all parents want to know the answer to that question. So I described my day. I said I get up 4:35 in the morning. I drive down to a soul food restaurant, which I love, the biscuits and everything. I have breakfast, and by 5:30, 6 o'clock, I'm in my office. I start working briefs, reviewing them, editing them, answering phone calls back east, abroad, and then I would wind up having meetings by 8 o'clock. Somebody's in my office. 8:30, 9 o'clock, all day I'm taking phone calls, having meetings. This happened, then I go to lunch with some business people. We discuss business, a deal or something. The afternoon is the same, where either I'm going to O'Hare Airport on a plane to go to New York or LA or Birmingham or Atlanta to negotiate a contract or whatever, and
This was during the time when you were with the budget, right?
with budget. So he said, so you talk, sit in meetings, talking to people, answering the telephone, and they pay you to do that? I said, yeah, they pay me very well too. Well, the point was that my father, who had risen to become a postal clerk, That's the highest level in his life. Couldn't conceive of where he was carrying bags of mail on his back, you know, from one place to the next. Couldn't conceive of a man who sat in an office and all he did was answer the phone, talk on the phone, review papers, and that's all he did. He says, "What kind of life is that? That's not hard work."
Tell me about the work part. And you get paid for that?
Yeah. He didn't realize what went into that. The thinking and the challenges. And
that's right. The problem solving.
Yeah.
And the writing and all of that, which is very skill intensive. And the knowledge of the law, you know.
He turned his head to the side, like his traditional head. And he always, this ash, he could talk without the ash falling from the cigarette. He'd say, "And they pay you to do that?" I never forgot that.
Did he ever bring up the point about what happened at BU? Anymore?
No, never did.
Never did. That was like hush hush.
Yeah, I never brought it up either.
Uh-huh.
Yeah. My father was very entrepreneurial. I mean, he, in his own way, he knew that I couldn't survive, and he couldn't pay for my survival going to places like Camp Atwater and Palmer and then to BU on a postal clerk's salary.
Right.
You know, apartment, a wife, and he had 3 children, had me and 2 others. They were grown, but he always looked after them.
Right.
And when they needed something. And he had a mother and an aunt, a sister, who took care of my grandmother. And they lived together, and they were there, and he supported his mother, and he supported his sister being there. He actually paid for her to be there, paid for everything, their food, their car, he bought them a car, and that's where I stayed later. But, you know, he couldn't, you know, I looked at what he earned when he died, his last paycheck, which when he retired 10 years before that, was $8,500. My first job when I got out of the military, working for the U.S. Treasury Department, was $8,500. And that was a good salary in 1963. I mean, a very good salary, $8,500.
I think the highest salary my father made was like $10,000 in his whole career. You know, and you look back and say, well, how did they manage those type of funds as effectively as they did? You know, even then, that was not a lot of money. You know, yeah. So you've been retired now for
like 17 years.
Yes. So what would be your, you know, what have you done in your retirement, and what would be your philosophy of retirement?
Well, if I had it to do over again, I'd be much more active. I probably wouldn't retire so early, or if I did retire, I would have been, my life would have been more productive if I'd done another job, or even gotten involved with the regular employment with some of the agencies that I like to support. If you have a career that's meaningful, you know a lot, and you have a lot of resources, and you ought not to just retire them. You ought to make them beneficial to somebody else. Use them to help others. I've used it by simply serving on boards, committees, and making contributions, but I think it would have been much more important if I'd actually given them 4 hours a day, or 3 hours a day, or 3 times a week or something, be in the office, actually do work. I could help them in ways that, you know, they're learning, I know. And old people really are, that's the one problem with the way our society is structured.
Role, yeah.
They should be, like Woody Allen says, we should come here old, and as we
and live our life with all that knowledge.
Yes.
Right.
And benefit society early.
Sure.
You know? And, so that would be my only regret, that I didn't stay more active. But I wanted to play golf, and I wanted to spend time with my kids, my grandchildren, and my wife, and spend more time on the vineyard.
And travel more?
Yeah, travel more. Yeah. all of those things. And those all take time.
But in a way, your community, your service role, you did fulfill it in the midst of your professional role.
Yeah.
You know, with the work you did with the Urban League.
Well, I got my wife to do some of the things I should have done.
Mm-hmm. So, what are the number of children you have and their names?
I have 2 boys, Mark, and Mark Blakely Lockhart is going to be 53. Oh, no, he just turned 53, that's right. And Diallo Henry Williams, who is going to turn 44 shortly. Mark has 2 girls, 17 and 15, Blakely and Callie. And they live in Richmond, Virginia. And their mother is Anne Gertner, the German name, Dutch German name.
Mm-hmm.
She comes from Fairfield, Connecticut. And what's really interesting here is the irony is that Mark, when I left home, I wanted a more orderly, intellectual service on Sundays. So I grew up in the AME church and the Baptist church, but I wanted less passion and more intellect. So when I went to Chicago and I was older and wanted to start a new life as a lawyer, I joined the Episcopal Church. And I thoroughly enjoyed that. But I joined St. Paul's Episcopal in Hyde Park, and that's where Mark was christened when he was born, and where he grew up in church. And he later married Anne, who was from Fairfield, Connecticut, and who had been christened and grew up in the St. Paul Episcopal Church in Fairfield, Connecticut. And when they moved to Richmond, Virginia, where he worked after leaving Atlanta, they joined the Episcopal Diocesan Church, St. Paul's. And so their 2 girls are growing up in St. Paul's.
The 3 St. Paul's. Amazing.
Isn't that interesting?
Amazing
And
confluence there.
Diallo, my younger son, lives in Fort Lauderdale, 3 blocks from us, so that's very handy. He has 2 boys who are 4 years old, and the second is about to be in October 2 years old. So it's Diallo and Dakar.
Okay, so describe your children and the role you played as a parent in their development, including your philosophy of parenting. And was there an educational emphasis in your parenting?
Well, naturally, there was always an educational emphasis in my family. And my kids always knew that they were going to have to get an education. I wanted them all to be lawyers, naturally. That's what most fathers want. And they both rejected the idea. And it was pretty good logic to their rejection. When they were growing up, when they were very young, we were merging 2 families together, and that was in itself a crisis. But they saw me working all the time, 7 days a week. Even when I was at home, I was working. So they pretty much, to make a long story short, decided they didn't want a life where they were working all the time. And they wanted, and obviously that sent a message to me, which I didn't get until later, that they needed more of my time as a parent.
Mm-hmm.
So I didn't realize how much I'd neglected them. So, that's something that parents have to do. They have to balance. Now, the new generation are doing it a lot differently. I mean, the fathers fully participate in the raising of the kid at home, in the household chores, and everything about it, and spend time going with their kids to their games and to their activities, and supporting them in it, and listening to them. Fathers in my era heard their kids say something, and they said, "Oh yes, yeah, that's great." But their mind was on the office or something they were about to do, or some project. They weren't really listening to their child.
Listening attentively.
Yes.
That's right.
Hearing what they said and digesting it, and therefore saying, "Oh, hold on. I got to turn around and pick my child up and say, let's sit down and talk about it. Now, what is it you say you wanted to do?" And doing it with them. So I neglected that. Ruth was a great mother, and she did all that. But she shouldn't have had to do it all by herself. You know, early part of my life, my career, it was very difficult for me to afford time at home. I was never home. And I was trying to run a law firm. That's
Grueling.
almost
Grueling.
24/7.
Yeah.
It's crazy.
Yeah, yeah.
I had very little time. I had 4 or 5 hours to sleep and then back to the office.
Right.
And
And the irony is that's all really for the family.
yes,
But, you know, there are needs of the family that are sort of put into a different category because of that
right,
necessary commitment to the
exactly.
to make a living for them.
Yeah.
You know.
Yeah.
So, any more on philosophy of parenting? Any gems of wisdom that others could benefit from? I guess that can lead us to the next question: is how did you manage problems or crises that may have developed while they were growing up?
Badly. Poorly, I should say. Or not as well as they could have.
Uh-huh.
Simply because, as I just said, I wasn't there
Right.
as much as possible. Things were developed.
But
I
sometimes
would-
you learn things
Yeah.
in that regard. You know, like you say, well, this is something that may have been a good idea. You know.
I think I started listening when a few years after I married Ruth, and I remember distinctly I always was looking at other opportunities, no matter where I was. So even when I was at Budget Rent-A-Car, I got an opportunity to become general counsel for the largest privately held company in America, and it was headquartered in Minneapolis. So Mark and Diallo were very little. I mean, Mark was probably 15 at the time. Diallo was 9 years younger, so that puts him at 6. You know, he didn't know too much. But he just moved to Chicago with his mom and joined us. And so I said, I don't know why. I said, I guess because I thought about some of these things I just talked about, and I said, I now involve my family more in my decision making. And so at dinner, I said, guys, Dad has an opportunity to go to a bigger, better job. He'll have not just a car assigned to him, but he'll have a big Lincoln town car we'll be riding around in. And I just explored all the benefits and everything, and we'll have clubs and everything you can go to and whatever. And they listened, and they said, isn't that cold up there? I said, yeah. So Mark says, well, I heard the summers were real short. I said, that's true. And he said, it's mostly cold and chilly and damp. And I said, yeah, that's true too. A lot of ice, so we can ski a lot. We can do a lot of ice sports. So I said, can we now get to the subject? I need to have a vote of confidence on the issue. Do we go or don't we go? And I put it up to them. And I was outvoted 3-1. So they want to stay in Chicago.
Is that
Chicago
right?
was bad enough. Winters were horrible.
And it's going to get
we-
worse up in
No,
Minneapolis.
at least we had long summers.
Right.
But
Well, that's an interesting parenting strategy that you just employed. I mean, that you just described in terms of putting some key family issues to a Democratic vote.
Yeah.
You know, which is after explaining,
Risky.
risky, exactly, especially if one is sort of in favor of a strategy.
But it does demonstrate that you really should discuss with your
Right, and they have
family.
skin in the game. So,
Yeah.
say for example, if they had made the decision to go to Minneapolis and they didn't like it, then it wouldn't be as bad because they made the decision,
Yeah,
right?
that's
They say,
right.
well, I wasn't forced into this.
Or if you don't necessarily put it to them as a decision and give them that opportunity because they don't know all the circumstances and the import of a decision such as that. But at least you discuss it with them, let them know what you're planning and thinking about, and you'd like to hear their points of view about it.
Right.
You know, and so it gives you a platform to say, keep talking about it for days and
Right.
weeks, and coaxing them along and transitioning them into the move.
Right.
If you have to make it the move.
And for them to think about those weighty issues,
Yeah.
it engages their maturity.
And they
you know.
feel like they had a buy-in in it
Sure.
and a part of the decision making over time.
Correct, exactly. What would you say is your assessment of the future prospects of the current generation of African American youth?
That's a very, very easy question to answer. And it's a good one and it's a bad one. I think for African American kids, for girls, young women, they're guided in the right direction. It's just the opposite of what it used to be when I came along. All the boys got priority for education and careers in professions, and the girls weren't so much. It was basically girls were guided to do nice cultural, dainty things, music and art and education and that sort of thing. And the boys were guided to be doctors and lawyers and engineers and chiefs, Indian chiefs of any kind, and go into business. And it's just the opposite today. Not so much because I think parents don't guide their kids, but I think African American boys are facing challenges in our society that discourage them so quickly from the right road, in education, from being dedicated to a good education, and for overcoming challenges in what they want to strive to achieve. And more often than not, young African American males are dropping out of school, high school, dropping out of college, just not dedicated toward education or a goal. And women now constitute probably as much as 60% or 2/3 of most classes.
In college.
In college.
That's right.
Yeah.
That's right. I saw those stats.
That's a sad statistic, and a very sad one for black males, because they desperately need that. And that's one of the things one of my organizations focuses on is the Boulé, Sigma Pi Phi fraternity. All of our Boulés are dedicated in their own communities to trying to support the education and guidance and monitoring and mentoring young African American males. Our focus is on young African American males. The girls are doing just fine. Women are going in big ways into all the professions, business, and we've got women in every area in corporate life now. Black women have done very well.
Also in academia.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Exactly.
So given this immense challenge, say, in the African American communities, particularly for males, what do you see as key solutions for that? For this challenge?
I don't know. It's a tough one. It's a complicated one. One of the problems we have, the key problem is, in the urban community, more often than not, and I hate to say that, but it's a reality, many of our kids are children of mothers who are barely adults themselves. And their parents haven't achieved anything, haven't had an education beyond high school, have no sense of how to direct their children in life and goals that they should do, nor do they have a sense of how they should go about improving their lives.
Right. Children educating children.
Yes. That's a bombshell, and I don't know how we overcome that. It's very troublesome. I hate to say it, but I think one of the things that we need to do is reevaluate our support, reevaluate the standards by which we support publicly people who don't achieve, who don't have any drive, and who just simply want to have children. And the second is we've got to find a way to get to, as we're trying to do in a Boulé, get to African American males in middle school, to give them mentoring as young as possible, so that they understand education is important. Having a goal in life is important, because you got to work towards something, and understanding responsibility to themselves, their family, and any family they may create.
What are the roles you think that society may do in terms of a fresh influx of new resources toward educating parents? Because, you know, if you got parents on board with a strategy with their kids, even though they may come in from modest and poor circumstances, if they are teaching their kids the right things in the home, those kids can rise out of that.
And
Because you're starting
yeah.
at an early age.
Yeah.
And I always think about the immigrant approach. You have these families coming to America from abroad, and they have really modest, they come with nothing, but they come with this vision for their children.
That's right.
And they infuse those kids with this to the point where those kids really have no choice but to go out and excel.
Yeah.
And so how do we get that kind of energy and place it in our community in the US so that we can be assured that future generations will just continually cycle that, you know?
I'm not sure. It's going to require a lot of resources from government and private sector. And you know, we as a race have to develop our own resources to deal with and attack these problems. But we have to also be candid with our own people, hard, just say, you know, the facts of life. You just can't have children and not have a sense of your own responsibility to yourself.
And for them.
Not be prepared to take them on. And I don't know how we do that, but we've got to drive that in somewhere. And you got to drive it into the males that they can't go around impregnating women, you know, just, and there's an equal responsibility.
On the part of the males.
Yeah. I mean, they got to know that I can't have sex without protection, and the girl has to know that I should not let them have sex without protection.
Right.
It's got to work both ways. I mean, we grew up in an era when it was almost impossible to have sex as a child. Girls, it was drilled into them.
Yeah.
And
The moral infrastructure was much stronger. Yeah.
It was really, I mean, to be humorous about it, but I mean, girls knew how to cross their legs and tighten them up, and so boys couldn't get their hands anywhere. And when they were dating and running around, it was just and that's. But the problem is, you see, young women today don't have a mother who can guide them too. Their mother, they're following in the footsteps of their mother.
That's right.
Who may be only 43 or 38.
Right.
And she came along like they did, having children at too early an age, and not getting an education, not having a responsible job. But you see, the key is, if you can get to those people and say, listen, we have a mechanism to support you to go back to school in a crash program at a special school where you learn something so that you can learn a skill and go on to community college or whatever for a couple of years and hone a discipline so you can get a decent job. But we also have to have, while we're asking her to do that, we've got to have mechanisms to house and teach and care for those children while she's away going to school. That's a big
social, societal responsibility.
But that can be done. Society has done it, and we've got to figure out how to get that done. I suspect we, in time, will do that because we're becoming more successful in business, and we're earning a lot more money than we ever did. And like any other race, we're going to start coalescing and pooling it, and strengthening our own internal organizations, and coming up with those ideas. These are not unique ideas. They're not that complex. Just got to be done.
Right.
Somebody's got to do it.
In an organized way.
Yeah.
And you know, every organization out there has got to just say all hands on deck, you know, to do this, because it's the future, you know, and it has to be done, really. Otherwise, you know, the life is going to be very, very problematic, you know.
And it's so difficult, and I understand that, because there's so many more challenges out there than there were when we came along. I mean, there's this huge business now in America and all over the world called the drug business, and it's so easy to get into because it's so easy to make quick bucks.
That's right.
I mean, big bucks.
And they become the role models for kids in those
Yes.
communities,
They're-
where they see these guys with the biggest cars and the most
That's right.
gold around their necks, and
And it's immediate. And so
Yeah,
you say,
yeah.
and he,
why do I go to college
Yeah, the kid-
for 5 years
right.
or whatever, and then try to eke out a career somewhere, and I can do it in 5 months.
And the only kids that really are determined to stay in school, it seems like, I shouldn't say the only, but a large number of them, are the ones who realize that they have some skill at athletics.
Mm-hmm.
And if I stay in school and get to graduate and go to college, I can hopefully become a pro in
Right.
basketball or
Right.
football or whatever. And but the other side of that coin is that same kid doesn't necessarily think, nor is even guided to think, that I should, when I'm in that school, listen and learn and get an education.
As a plan B.
Exactly.
Because the proportion of folks who get to the professional level is a very small proportion.
right.
Your chances are much better going into law,
Yeah.
or medicine, and so clearly those kinds of things have to be conveyed
Yeah.
at an early age,
right.
so that a child will really know what to emphasize.
Yeah. I mean, in our own personal situation, we didn't have that much money, but our families knew the right direction for us to go. They knew we had to have an education, and a solid one.
Yeah, we got that educational mantra in our
And
family.
we knew we were guided and coaxed into going into our different disciplines and professions.
Mm-hmm.
We weren't loosely out there, well, you decide.
Right, right.
I mean, my parents and my family would say, you're going to be a lawyer. I knew that from the beginning.
right.
Yeah.
So what are your hobbies?
Oh, my hobbies were basically, I used to love to play bridge. I don't do it very much anymore. I probably should get back to it. Tennis I loved. Golf I didn't dearly love. I just played it because it was a corporate requirement.
Is a part of the job description.
Yeah, it's a business thing.
Right.
And so I do it only occasionally now.
You used to sponsor golf tournaments, right?
Yeah, my company
Yeah,
performed
right.
one of the
Trans-America.
professional tournaments, the seniors.
Yeah. And
And
tennis as well.
We sponsored the Grand Prix tennis tournament. That's the 2-weeker. You know, and those are the big ones.
I remember
Yeah.
at some point you were talking about that. Yeah.
And as a part of my work,
Mhm.
I did most of the entertaining. So I had many guests who were political guests naturally.
Mhm.
At all of my affairs, at all these tournaments and events, and at 49er games.
Right.
Dianne Feinstein when she was a mayor and the senator, and Nancy Pelosi, and I know those people very well. We were all close. We did political work together, and we did programs together, and I lobbied them, and they lobbied me for things too.
Right.
So
So getting back to the hobbies, and because we're going to get into a little bit of that, where you can elaborate on that more. But how have the hobbies enriched your life?
I don't know that they have really.
Mhm.
If you could call tennis, which a hobby, I love tennis, and I enjoyed it immensely, and I used it also as a business tool for entertaining. So if I wanted to get an idea or a concept or whatever across to somebody, if they indicated they played tennis, naturally you invited them over and played with them, just like you do in golf.
Sure.
And so,
Build a rapport.
Yeah,
Mhm.
so I did that a lot. I used to play tennis almost every morning before I went to work.
So that's kept you fit and healthy.
That was a key
Yeah.
factor. Yeah,
Absolutely.
Yeah.
So that's a very important enrichment of life.
Yeah.
It kept you alive.
Yeah, and I also use the gym a lot.
Mhm.
The
Which is a
steam-
habit you've continued to
Yeah.
this day.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I hear you talking about that quite a
Yeah.
bit. So we can call the gym one of your hobbies, right?
Oh yeah.
Yeah.
The gym
So
starts
what is that?
my
What
day.
is what is that like?
It's
Every
important.
day?
Some people, we have bought virtually every instrument that you exercise on from time to time over the years, and it
And had it,
parked it in the bedroom,
right, right.
used it twice, and never went back to it, and then it just gained dust. And one of the things was missing, or maybe two things that are missing, is camaraderie and fun.
Mhm.
I mean, you can talk to yourself all you want, but you find yourself either reading the newspaper or watching TV and reading the news, listening to the news, or watching a show. That gets boring after a while. You go to the gymnasium, it's like going to work.
Yeah. It's a group effort. You meet friends.
Develop these friends.
Right.
You exercise together every morning. You greet each other. It's hello, how are you?
Yeah, yeah.
It's what's going on. How are the kids? What did you guys do over the weekend? Did you go out? What happened?
Right.
What's going on in your business? What's happening with your personal life? You know, what doctors are you seeing? What results are
So
you
it becomes a
getting?
combination
Yeah.
of exercise and
Camaraderie,
social
socialization,
networking.
and exchanging of serious information.
Sure.
Medical
Beneficial information.
Very.
Right. I found my tax accountant through somebody I met at the gym.
Yeah.
Yeah, and that was very, very fruitful.
Oh yeah. It's a big part of my life. It's when I get up in the morning. That's my incentive to get out of bed.
So you go every day to the gym?
Every work day, Monday through Friday.
Okay.
It's like going to the office.
So 5 days a week.
Saturdays and Sundays I like to walk the beach
Okay.
and go down there. And now I get my wife to go so that I don't do a lot of exercises. I walk briefly with her because then she caves.
Mm-hmm.
And I say, honey, would you want to go over here and get a breakfast? And she says, oh yes, that sounds like a good idea. So we have a relaxed time together on the beach and walking and talking and spending the morning talking about the kids, of course.
Right.
And now getting into the new mode of doing selfies there and sending them to families.
Oh, okay.
Especially in the winter, so we can
yeah.
say, oh, look at us.
Hey, I saw some selfie sticks down there in Old Bluffs. You got a stick and everything?
Yeah.
We got the stick.
Yeah, I don't have a stick.
I got a stick.
Yeah.
I got it in Europe
Yeah.
last summer.
Yeah, the kids here, they bought several of them while they were here.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, they were doing selfies. So
Right. So, okay. Describe your favorite one or two vacations and why were they special?
Oh, I think my early vacations used to be forced to go to your family on holiday for the 2 weeks you had vacation. But they were the most delightful because this is the time you spent as an adult with your parents, getting to know them better and what's going on in their lives and sharing your family with them, you know, because we grew up in a world where we were traveling and remote and lived and worked in a distant place from them. In the old world, you went off to school, you came back and you bought a house down the street from your parents or in the neighborhood not far. They saw you every day or every so often and they got to play with your kids and keep them. In the new world, you know, you live 400 or 500 miles away, 1,000 miles away, 3,000 miles away, so you don't communicate with your family very much. I mean, a telephone call, yes, but spending time doing things together.
Mm-hmm.
And spending time with my dad, spending time with my mom, having them play with their grandchild. You know, my mother just goes crazy, so she used to take Mark to Atlantic Beach or Hilton Head. They'd do time together, you know, and he'd have her out on the tennis court. She didn't want to be there, but she wanted to be with him.
Right.
And so it's just, those were the best times. Really, I think they were absolutely the best.
And
My favorite hobby is going to Europe,
Mm-hmm.
and only two places, Italy and France.
Mm-hmm.
You know, my hobby is eating.
Right.
That's my real hobby.
So you would call yourself a foodie, so to speak?
Well,
you know that expression, right?
yeah. There's another term I like. What is it? Starts with an E.
Sort of a, we say a
something-
cuisine connoisseur.
Yeah, something of a gourmand.
Yeah.
I specialize in Italian food and French food, but now more so Italian. I love Italian food.
Mm-hmm.
I
What
can't,
particular dishes?
Oh, everything. Pastas, seafood, fish, shellfish. I really appreciate when you have it the way the Italians and the Greeks prepare it. Squid and all those things are terrific.
So you found your favorite Italian restaurants in
everywhere.
here, Fort Lauderdale.
Yeah, Italian.
You don't necessarily have to go to Italy and France for
No. We have two wonderful Italian restaurants right far from our house. The favorite is where we had Ruth's 70th birthday party finale on Sunday night was at Serafina, her favorite too. She loves Italian food.
Awesome.
Yeah.
So that's a great
Yeah.
that both of you can be very happy with this decision of which restaurant to go to.
Oh yeah.
So this goes back to something you've already alluded to, is what are your community service activities in your career, and what has been the impact of those activities? You mentioned the Urban League.
Well,
and
I
there are
started
perhaps
out.
others as well.
Started out in.
So,
It's gonna get real hot out here shortly. We're gonna get sun.
yeah, it looks like it's going to warm up. So you were going to elaborate a little bit on your community service activities. Maybe you could start with the Urban League.
Well,
because you was seem to
Well, I
be
might start in Chicago.
Okay.
Chicago, when I was young, there were a number of organizations that wanted to see more diversification on their boards, and so some organizations hired people to work with community people to try to identify good candidates for the various museum boards and the like. So I got selected to be on the junior board of the Art Institute of Chicago, and that gave me an outlet to some very rich, connected white people and corporate leaders and whatever, youngsters who were coming along but had family heritage, legacies, so they were destined to be moving up into the world. In the black side, there were entrepreneurs, like a man who ran Parker House Sausages, which were famous in those days, a black company, and an ice cream company. And he met me and he was impressed with me, so he asked me to come on the board of a minority enterprise small business investment company. And that concept was created during the Nixon administration, interestingly enough. And it was a way to get small business investments to minorities, because the private institutions weren't doing it.
Was it Model Cities? Was that one of them?
No.
That was different.
No, that was different.
Yeah.
This was to actually get you guaranteed loans to
pursue business.
Yeah. And I did that, and later became chairman of that. And those were the foundations for a lot. Then I did some other stuff there. I've forgotten what it was, but in any case, that was the foundation for my getting involved in boards. So when I moved to San Francisco, it was pretty slam dunk. I was a high visibility corporate exec for the most visible corporate building in
the
San
city.
Francisco and in the state, for that matter, or in the West, or in the country. It was one of the outstanding. We paid to promoted it so that it would be that. So naturally, I had a lot of people asking me to serve on boards, and I selected the Fine Arts Museum because it was the richest, the largest, and the most well-connected. And plus, I was on the Art Institute board, junior board in Chicago, and I was developing a great interest in learning about artists and art, and I wanted to continue that. And that, of course, put me at a pretty high level of connections.
Right.
And I learned quickly, in spite of the fact that I thought I was somebody and would be appointed because I was a hotshot, I learned the truth is that you're appointed because they think you can bring us money. And so they quickly said, well, you have to give or get $20,000. So I said, what? This is back in the early 80s.
Right.
So
Surprise, surprise.
So I go, how am I going to do this? But what I thought of, and I went back to them with the executive committee, I said, what, I noticed you do not have a corporate development committee. He said, no, that's a darn good idea. And so I naturally cheered that, and I got some corporate guys, all the corporate guys who were my peers, to serve on it, volunteered off board, and they, of course,
It's like a subcommittee of the board. Yeah,
but
yeah,
you
yeah.
know, this was an attractive thing for them too. Their
Sure.
vision was that maybe one day I can get on the board of directors.
Right.
So I said, you understand that you got to give us $10,000 in
Each.
your corporation. Man, I had like $200,000
Dollars
the
off
first year.
the chart. You figured a way to do that real fast.
And of course, I had to do the same thing with the Urban League.
Right.
And the Urban League survived based upon corporate support, principally.
Sure.
And so that's principally how I got the idea of working. I was chairman of the board of the Urban League at the same time I was chairman of, well, I was chairman of the KQ.
So you got the idea from the Urban League to carry to the Fine Arts.
Right.
Yeah, I got it.
Yeah. And I learned that, and I was then on the KQED, our Public Broadcasting Board.
Oh, yeah. I used to listen to that.
So I became chairman of that.
Yeah.
And that catapulted me to the National PBS Board.
Mm-hmm.
And so I met a lot of interesting people there, like Rockefeller and his wife Susan, who served on our board.
Okay.
Sharon, from West Virginia.
Yeah.
Sharon was the daughter
Of
Percy.
Senator Percy.
Yeah.
Right.
Her
She
sister
also had gone on Crossroads Africa. I remember one of them.
Is that right?
Yeah, right.
She's a very wonderful woman.
Right,
She
right.
gave a lot of time to a lot of causes.
This was in Chicago or in?
No, this was in San Francisco.
So they were living in West Virginia.
No, she lived.
Oh, this is the national board
Yeah,
of
the
PBS.
national board. Yeah.
Oh, yeah.
Her
yeah,
husband
yeah.
was the United States Senator from
Yeah,
West
yeah,
Virginia,
yeah.
so she was living there. But
Exactly.
you remember, you knew her because her sister was mercilessly killed
Yeah.
in their
Twin
own
sister.
home. Yeah,
Twin sister.
Yeah.
Right.
And they never found the person
perpetrator.
who did it. Yeah. So I met a lot of people there. And one of the most interesting persons I met, and I can't remember his name right at the moment, but a guy who was our chair at the time, who was a Mormon, and he was high in the Mormon church. And he was, after his third year as our chair, or second year, he was called back. And the call back meant that he was called to be a disciple of, there were 12 disciples of the church, the highest level.
Right.
And they select the leader. And that's a full-time job. And they don't serve on any outside boards or any outside activities. Their total devotion is to managing the Mormon church. And it's dealing with its discipline and all those kinds of things.
Doctrine and all of that. Yeah.
This guy, by the way, was brilliant. He was, in fact, the best chair I'd ever served with. And I've been chair too.
Of all kinds of different committees.
Far,
Yeah, right.
He was smart. He remembered everything. He could analyze and respond to anything that you said later in his comments, and he would summarize everything. I mean, he had
Great memory.
He had a fantastic memory.
Right.
But he knew how to use it. And of course, he was religious. He also had all the right phrases and the right. I mean, you couldn't beat him in arguing at all.
Right.
You know?
He was nuanced.
It would seem unpatriotic and definitely irreligious. It was just a challenge. Anything he said.
Right. Yeah.
And so the Urban League, and then I did a number of those things. And of course, professionally, I was on a lot of professional boards, like Public Affairs Council and state government, Governor's Council, and things like that. But that had to do with work. Yeah. Well, the others have to do with work in the sense that I probably wouldn't.
Indirectly.
I wouldn't have been on them if I hadn't been
Exactly. If you didn't have the position that you had.
Exactly.
Yeah, I've in my experience with boards, which is nowhere near as extensive, but just as a school board member in an international school, I remember just in that one situation over 6 years, the kind of discussions we had over time, month after month, and issues we had to address and problems. I learned so much just about being in meetings with people and learning how to listen, learning how to sort of benefit from another person's skill, and it was very rewarding. And so I can imagine in your case, where you had all these different boards and all these different people you encountered, that must have really made you a much more skillful, how should we say, operator in those environments, you know?
Well, this is a whole aspect that I never mentioned. I just forgot to talk about it. When I was in Chicago and became an Episcopalian, there was a lot going on in the civil rights movement, and so my church was somewhat dwindling in population because we were on the border of University of Chicago and another
Hyde Park.
community, and people moved because there were corporate people who joined that church who were members. But the Blackstone Rangers were a big issue in Chicago at that time. They were fighting to protect black businesses in the black community, and they, at the time that my church was about to try a merger to survive financially with another church in the community. They didn't need two Episcopal churches in the University of Chicago area because we were trying to dominate with getting all the clergy and professors to be our speakers on Sunday. So we were battling each other for that. And so the Blackstone Rangers became an issue, and I was at the time on the vestry for a number of years, which is the board of directors, the board of trustees, and then I was a vice chair of the board and junior warden, they call it. So I was a lawyer, and the rector needed guidance, and nobody was volunteering, so I gave him legal advice on how we go about doing the merger. Well, that got me before the bishop because everything had to be approved by the diocesan. The bishop turned out to be a truly wonderful man, Gerald Francis Burrell, and he was near the end of his career, but he was sensitive. He recognized my skill in doing what I was doing, merging, and I merged the churches very quietly and smoothly. We didn't lose members, there was no fighting, and I settled the issue of the Blackstone Rangers by suggesting that we not fight with them, but we give them a house, a place to meet, and they became our friends and our protectors. So they met downstairs in the church, and my rector just loved them because he was secure. But it brought me to the attention of the bishop, and so the bishop put me on several boards. St. Leonard's House, which was an outreach, it was a home for urban boys, mostly black and Latino, and so I served on St. Leonard's board. And then he appointed me to the board of trustees of the diocese. That was the pinnacle. I mean, all of these people were the heads of major corporations that you knew, so that was my first major corporate contact, and that was very impressive. Of course, my wives all enjoyed it because they gave the finest balls.
Okay.
You know, fundraisers.
Right.
And they met. They were very elegant. Everything they did was elegant.
The elegant affairs.
Yeah.
Where you have to dress up.
Yeah.
In your finest.
I don't know if you know this, but beyond the Vatican, if you're a bishop of bishop rank in the Catholic Church or the Episcopal Church, and frankly in the AME Church, I'll get back to that, you live like kings, princes. I mean, they truly are princes of the church. I mean, my bishop had two country, automatically comes with a position, almost castle-like house, with a full staff of cooks, cleaners, servers, chauffeurs, valets. They all have that. That's why they want to be bishop. It's a great life. And so I spent my time going to meet the bishop and being served dinner, or lunch or whatever. And it was very, very elegant. But they all have that. When you walk through I don't know if you've ever been in a bishop or archbishop or a cardinal's home, but it is mind-boggling.
No, I haven't.
You get the sample of it just by walking through the Sistine Chapel and all those places.
Sure.
You walk through St. Peter's and you see the elegance and grandeur of the art and the marble and it's spectacular.
And they have that in their homes.
That's right. Yeah.
Very impressive.
Yeah.
Very impressive.
Yeah, absolutely. It's fantastic. But I had been so. I've been in church all my life. We used to go to 2 and 3 churches on Sundays, as I told you, to promote our businesses back in King Street, my mother's businesses. And so I was worn out after all of this in Chicago. And when I was moving to San Francisco, I wanted to take a sabbatical from church, so I didn't go to church at all there. And Bishop in Chicago would call, and he'd get Ruth, and he'd say, "Well, how's Jim doing? How are you doing, Ruth?" She said, "Just fine." And I'd tell her, "Don't ever give me the phone. I want sabbatical. All he's going to do is put me back in the church." And I did that successfully for a year, and I think he understood.
Right.
He wanted me to get active in the Diocese of San
Yeah,
Francisco.
in San Francisco, right.
And
he's already calling them
well,
up.
he's called him and said, "There's a young man you really need to have."
Right.
And I didn't want to be that deeply involved. I wanted a break. I was
Yeah,
tired.
sure.
And I wanted to focus on my new job, which was a new one entirely.
And
And
want to perfect
so,
that, right.
one thing led to another. I've been on sabbatical ever since. I step foot in churches for weddings and funerals now, and glorious days. Now, I served Calvin Presley, we talked about, who came from down where we were and was in school with me.
Yeah, you were talking about
got me on
him.
the board of the Institute of Church Administration and Management, which he helped create as a part of the Intertheological ITC at Atlanta University.
Yeah.
And
I'm familiar.
and that's an arm of that, was an arm of that. So it consisted of the heads of all the black denominations.
Right.
And it had only 3 corporate guys, boys on it. So that was Charlie Teemer, me, and a guy from Detroit. And I got to tell you, Ernest, I might have not had a high opinion of us as I should have, but to sit and listen to these guys talk was marvelous. They were brilliant. And you just
The ITC folks.
No, the bishops who and the heads of the denominations.
In the African American churches.
Yeah, Baptists.
Yeah, okay.
Right on here.
How did your parents influence your development, and did they stress education?
Oh, my mother, my God. It's education. That's all she talked about. And that's all she wanted. My mother was going to school almost the entire time I was at home. And even after. She got 2 masters. She didn't go to very challenging schools, but because you got to work
At the same time.
at the same time.
Support
It took
yourself.
a long time to get all those courses in to qualify. But she wanted to have the degree so she could move up and get a higher respect and higher salary. But she also wanted the satisfaction of knowing she could do it.
Where did she get it from?
I don't know that. You see, my grandma died in my lap when I first moved there, so I didn't get to know my grandma Catherine very well. She was pretty old and frail, and I don't doubt if I knew her more than 6 months. And my grandfather Dave had long since been gone. My mother was the baby of 12. My father, interestingly enough, was a baby of 12.
Really?
Yes.
Wow. So both
So,
212.
In both cases, that meant over half of their siblings I never knew because they were dead.
Right.
They were
Because
big,
they were the young ones.
there were big gaps
Yeah.
in those years in the old. See, they had children to work the farms, and they were close. Some were close, and there were some that were years apart.
Right.
And my mother could have been the daughter of her older sisters.
Exactly.
That's the age span.
That's the span.
Yeah.
The reason I was asking about that, because obviously, okay, Catherine was a brother of John Bunyan Bennett, who was a great-great-grandfather.
Yeah.
And it seems like somehow that idea of education was passed down
In the family.
all
the way.
from.
Yeah.
So that's 2 siblings that have passed it down,
Yeah.
Because I was always trying to figure out, well, where did they get, I had colleagues in high school and so on that didn't have any idea of going to college, and yet somehow that was not even an issue,
I think Margaret, if that were not the case, and it may very well have been, I think it was clear she wanted her route to work was going to be a beautician, and she wanted to go off to school to learn it well, and she went to New York, and in New York City she went to one of the top beauty schools, but a part of that, beauty schools would teach you how to carry yourself, how to dress,
Right.
and perform. And I have a picture of her when she so-called graduated from the beauty school or was presented or whatever it was.
Mm-hmm.
And I mean, these women were just decked out. This is 1930,
Right.
4,
Style.
35.
Yeah.
And,
I seen some of the old pictures, you
and
know.
so she probably developed this in New York, this need to be like the New Yorkers who
That's
were there,
right. Right.
dressed to the nines.
Exactly.
You know.
Exactly.
And she probably learned that in New York. So
Mhm.
when she came home, she wanted to do the same thing.
Mm-hmm.
And she used to put on, I don't know if you've forgotten this, but she had a week of beauty. It's not a beauty contest as much as a beauty fashion show at Tomlinson High School Auditorium, Monday through Friday. And it was like a play. But the women, would dress. And so my cousin Florrie Johnson from Charleston, who was my mother's older sister's daughter, would come down, and Florrie was drop dead gorgeous. Florrie was the queen at Howard University.
Oh, really?
Oh, yeah. And then there was my cousins Richie and Lynn Foster in New York, whose mother Brownie used to come down. She was in the show. She's in all the pictures. But it was Brownie's father, Alexander Mazik in New York, who ran a photo studio called Brownie's Photo Salon and Studio. And so he would come down and photograph all these girls marching in all these different dresses and styles.
I bet you those are some classic photos. We
I
should
wish
try
I
to get a
had
hand
more
on.
of them.
Yeah, figure out where those are.
I have a few, yeah. So, Mother learned about styles, and so and your mother was always a critiquer. She could
I'm
tell
sure
her,
my mother learned a lot from your mom. You know,
I thought they learned a lot from each other.
Yeah,
Probably.
right, exactly.
Of course, your mother was not into clothes, making clothes in that early place when they were first starting together.
Right.
Which because she told us today that came later.
Yeah.
As an opportunity for a job. Yeah, but she was. I didn't know she had worked in the office, but it comes to me that I did know that she worked in the office, and in your dad's office.
Mm-hmm. So, what are the most valuable lessons your parents taught you about life? You didn't really get a chance to talk about your father's influence yet.
Well,
too.
it was education. But one of the things they taught me, which was a hindrance, was about risk taking. And they don't do this, don't do that. Be careful. Don't get involved in this. That could lead to
This outcome.
Yeah, and that terrible stuff. So I never had the instinct to veer off into dramatic things which might have involved risk in a lot of ways. I'll give you an example. When I was first practicing law in Chicago, I had just come away from representing the fire police departments and so forth, so they all knew me. So I get a call one day when I was in private practice, and the guy says, the fireman says, I want to come over and see you. So he comes over and he said, I'm referring this case to you. So I said, oh, that's great. Car accident. And I'm very naive, so I'm going, yes, that's great. So he said, that'll be $50. And I said, oh, well, that's how it's done on the referral. So I didn't have $50, so I had to go borrow it from my partners. And I gave it to him. And the next day he said, he called me, he said, I can give you $15, $20 a week. I didn't realize that there were lawyers who specialized in accident cases who were getting referrals from the police and the firemen because they were the ones who were on those cases, and they were paying spiffs to get the referrals. But they were huge practices. They made tons of money because they just filed lawsuits and everyone was brought in some money, whether it was a trial or a settlement.
Right.
And I could have done that. I could have had 50 cases a month. I could have built a whole law firm on just referrals and that kind. But that was strictly, in the strictest sense of ethics, a violation of
Kickbacks.
Yeah. And that was a day of no publicity. Lawyers couldn't publicize or promote themselves publicly, and nor get compensation for referral cases. It's a risk that many lawyers took and succeeded big time. I wasn't willing to take that risk.
And that was something that
My
you
mother
had
and
gotten
my
at an
father
early age.
drilled in me,
Yeah.
I don't want to ever come to have to get you out of jail. I don't want you to ever violate the law. You're a smart enough kid to succeed on your own without doing that. I have no doubt on my self-analysis later in life that had a lot to do with it.
Right.
Now, I could have been a big-time lawyer and not done any of these other things just because I was a major.
You were more so established in that sort of regime that you wouldn't have taken these other opportunities that carried you in a different direction.
And I very well could have, if I'd succeeded in that and not gotten in trouble, I would definitely have been wound up as a judge in Cook County, and that would have been my career.
Right.
Yeah. I got the offer to be a judge anyway, but
you were heading west.
I was heading west.
Heading west.
Yeah.
Describe your parents as persons you know well.
Yeah, well, my father was a lovely man. He was very kind to people, very sensitive to people and his children, cared about them. He had 3 children by 3 different women, and he took care of all of us. Never had to worry about anything. I mean, he struggled to do that, but he always did it. He was an interesting guy. He was gregarious. He liked women. He spent a lot of time from work stopping off at bars. He was popular. When I was older and used to follow him around, I noticed that everybody knew him when he walked in a bar. You know, they'd say, "Hey, Edgar, how are you?" You know. So he got around, but he was very sensitive. He was also very strict. And I told you about the way he's evaluated my performance in college, and he's struggling to make the payments for me, and he decisively. And it also happened when I was later in college. I had gotten a job working at not Atlantic City. I'd done that. I moved to Asbury Park with my high school guys. We all went to work together. So we moved down to Asbury Park because it was busier.
From Homer.
Yeah. And so we moved down there. And after a couple of weeks, I said, "Can't do this." We had to walk like 2 miles because segregation, you know, the black folks were way over here, away from the beach. All the work on the pier was 2 miles away. And so I was on my feet all day long. And we were bussing tables. They didn't let the blacks wait tables. We were bussing and washing in the kitchen. Standing all day long, except for the momentary, quick 5 or 10 minutes they allow you to take lunch. And I was exhausted. We'd get back to that room with Charles Jackson and George Terrell and I, we'd be lying there. We used to pick up a bottle of milk out of the milk machine, vending machine, and just eat cookies and drink that. We would have been exhausted. And then you get up and start the same thing the next day. So I just told the man, "Cash me out. I got to do better than this." So I got on a train, went back to New York. My dad worked at nights, so he didn't get home till like 10 or 11 o'clock because he was out collecting numbers during the morning. He ran a numbers business. And so my mother cooks breakfast. I'm enjoying her usual breakfast, my stepmother.
Right.
And I hear the key in the door. And I'm going, "Oh, shit." So I don't know what he's going to say. And he comes in, humming as he usually does with a cigarette in his mouth. Didn't say hello. Went to the bedroom, took off his clothes, went to the bathroom. And he came to have breakfast. He sat there. He didn't say a word to me. And he started eating, and then he looked up and he said, "Are you sick?" I said, "I'm sure you're not ill." I said, "No, Dad, I know I'm not ill." He said, I said, however, he didn't let me get past however. He said, "There's an 11:45 train back to Asbury Park out of Penn Station. I want your ass on it." I said, "Well, I haven't started my practice." He says, "I want you out of here, and on that train you go back to work." He wouldn't let me explain. He knew what was going on. He knew it was hard work. He knew I didn't like hard work. I hadn't done it, and I didn't want to do it. But he taught me a lesson. A lot of stuff you don't like to do. You just have to work through it, you know. But you can't quit.
Right. The tough love.
Yeah,
The tough love. Yeah.
yeah.
Right.
You
Right.
gotta, or you find a better job.
So, give a memorable quote from your mother or your father. Any proverbs they used to tell you on a regular basis?
No, I can't think of any, actually. I really can't.
Uh-huh.
Well, I have, yes, I do. Because when I was in high school and came home from Palma in the summertime in New York, all I did was play and meet my buddies who went to Palma, and we'd go to movies and play ball and all that stuff. Then at night, my older cousins would let me go with them to the Small's Paradise. You know, I wasn't of the age, but I was 16 or 17.
Right.
And they'd just make me dress up with a shirt and tie, you know, and jacket, and look adult, and all I had to do was be behind them and go belly up to the bar. So they told me what to drink, what to order, you know, and they would do ordering for me mostly. And I guess the barmaids probably knew what was going on. You know, a lot of kids do.
Yeah.
So, what am I talking about now?
You know,
The quote.
so
I would spend a lot of time on weekends and during the week coming in late, like 2 in the morning and 3 in the morning. We'd find some girls, we'd hang out and all that. So I had to sleep on the couch in the living room. And of course the bedroom is here, the living room is here, and you had to walk through it to get to the bathroom, which was next to the kitchen at the other end of the apartment. So my dad, when he came home, I'd be asleep, but he got home at 10 in the morning, and I'd be on the couch, you know, out, and he'd be walking through there humming. The early bird gets the worm, I just found a quarter on the street this morning. Oh, I found $50. Oh boy, and he'd start jiggling the money in his pocket, and he'd come back through it. Early bird gets the worm. He's trying to tell me, get your little ass out of that bed and do something, will you? Well, yeah, he said that over and over, and I'd get up, get out of there.
You got the message.
Yeah.
All righty. And I'm sure you probably turn that around on your kids from time to time, right?
Yeah. Well, I made them both do what he did.
Right.
I made them work. I made them go to school and get a job.
Yep.
And work and and participate in paying.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, both Mark and Diallo did.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Okay, so here's a general question. Tell us about your cultural background and importance of family to your lifestyle.
My family was everything to me.
Mm-hmm.
Probably, I can't begin to tell you how much support my family had. I did a lot of stuff, and I don't know how well it was, but I don't ever recall a family member saying, wow, you really messed up. They were always, whether it was a play or a singing contest, you know, in school, it was always
Encouragement.
Jimmy, that's great stuff. You did a good job, boy.
Right.
You know?
Right.
That you got to instill in children. You got to let them know that so they have confidence.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
I mean, I did a 3-act play. I never knew I could do that when I was in 9th grade, because I was in The Little Minister, James, and I had to stay on stage for the whole 3 acts. And I remembered it. My memory today was all my adult life. Terrible. I don't know how I remembered that play. But we did it over and over and over and over again. And I was a little minister, minister in England.
That could have been the beginning of an acting career, right?
Yeah, well, actually, I have used it. You know, in the Bohemian Club, I act. I do a lot of acting in plays at the Bohemian Club.
Uh-huh.
Yeah. But I should have been an actor, but I didn't want to sit around New York and wait on tables for 10 years waiting for a role to break.
So you grew up in the South, mainly, where they're in an African-American environment. How would you describe an African-American culture in reference to the things that you just mentioned? And what would you say would be the basic components or characteristics of that cultural system?
When I was growing up as a boy?
Yeah, just in general, but you know, that's your initial experience with culture, so to speak. And then, so how does that how would you describe it?
I
And
think-
even to this day, I mean, there is a certain culture that we can describe as. Thank you very much.
Yes. Well, it's cocktail time for me.
Oh, well. Here's,
Thank you so
I'm gonna-
much.
I'm
That's
gonna come in
very,
in a
that's
minute
very
and fix
generous of
myself
you.
a drink.
okay.
Okay,
You want me
thanks.
to bring it?
No, I get it.
Okay.
You want to do it?
I don't mind.
Do you?
Is that, you want a new glass?
Yeah, this is just apple juice. You can
Oh,
pour that out. You know, 3 cubes,
Yes.
a snort of Jack Daniels, and a small drippings of ginger ale.
Okay. And how about you?
Just water.
Okay.
I'm
so
fine.
Thank you,
here's
Shelley.
water here.
That's my, thank you so much.
You're welcome.
Oh, got the ice and everything. Wonderful.
Mhm.
Thank you.
No,
Very
you're
thoughtful of you.
welcome.
You know, the thing that I think that was most impressive, I remember as being very scary. Remember, I was half-time in New York, half-time down there. And whether I was, all summers we're in New York, and holidays, whatever. And going to King Street was, you know, I'd be told what you couldn't do, how you had, you know, look the other way when you're walking down the street. Definitely don't look at white girls or women in the face. Always have your head slightly tilted down when you're talking, as if the white man happens to say hello. You know, you don't look him in the eye. Never do that. That was scary stuff. And I just, and hearing about things that were happening to people, you know, and quietly in our circle. And the thing that impressed me the most, I think, later in life was to realize the danger we lived in, all of us, and the solidarity we had amongst ourselves.
In the face of this danger.
Exactly.
Mm-hmm.
It may have been absolutely necessary, but whatever the reason, black folks were really close.
Right. Close knit.
And they did stuff in secret. The messages got around secretly, not on the phone, and they communicated through the church connection, other ways, EYPU meetings, whatever. But you hear about stuff, you know. You know, I was already a lawyer. I was at the same time I'm talking about when I was in keep holding down Bill's office. So I'm rushing back and forth. So weekends I was seeing clients down in King Street. And one day I was driving on Thursday going back there, and I got not far out of Florence. Or was it close to Lake City, I guess. And there was this backup. I'd never seen a backup on 52. It was slowed down, and I could see cars, and nothing like I'd seen outside of New York. And I couldn't turn around because we were now all in a lineup, and there was no reason to turn around. I had no idea there was any threat or anything. And as we inched closer and closer, there were all these white hoods standing on the side of the road, in the road, directing traffic. And then I happened to look over to the right, and there was this big, giant fire going. And a whole lot of these white hoods sitting there having a meeting or whatever. I mean, I was scared.
Cross burning.
They were having a meeting, yeah,
Yeah.
cross burning. And I mean, I said, so I'm trying to figure out how I can turn my car around to get the hell out of there. And the time that I was about to turn the car on my window on the side, I didn't see him. Oh, thanks,
I hope
Shelley.
I got
Thank
it
you
right.
so much. It'll be
You're
right.
welcome.
Anything you do will be right. Thank you, darling.
You're welcome.
Thanks for everything you've done today, too. I really appreciate it.
Thanks for breakfast.
Yes, yes.
It was,
And,
all of us did it together, family effort.
yeah. And he said, roll down your window. I could hear him, and so I rolled the window down. And he looked around behind the back seat, looked all around, and he saw my briefcase. He said, open your briefcase. So I opened it. He saw there was nothing but briefs and papers and files. And he didn't say anything. And then he said, go on. That was a scary incident. I had heard about, read about encounters with the Ku Klux Klan, but it's all theory until
Right,
you
right.
get
Until
done.
you experience it
Man,
directly.
and that was a scary moment.
Mhm.
I'll tell you,
Uh-huh.
really amazing. And we might want to move over. Oh,
Those
yeah.
days, you know. Yeah.
Yeah.
So let's move it right along here. And how did your school and university influence your development? Were there any inspiring teachers when you know, at various stages? You've had a lot of education, so, you know, at various stages. And here again, you know, there may be some overlap with some of the things you've already said, but, you know, obviously, you know, as you talked about education being very important, you know, obviously those educational experiences have been very.
Yeah, Palmer was very unique, and in a lot of ways. But
Describe
soft-
Palmer.
soft-
Describe Palmer a little bit.
Palmer's a black preparatory school of about 250 students, roughly 70, maybe 70 are boys and 180 girls, and lived separately on different sides of the campus. Met only in class or in the dining hall for the 3 square meals a day. We sat together there with rules of etiquette and decorum, and it was a school for black professionals and businessmen to send their children to, and it was well, I guess it was considered an elite school at that time. One of the things that I'm leading to is that as good as it wasn't really very good academically. I never realized that being a top student, always in the top 5 or 10% of the class, you go off to a major university, 25,000 of the students, and what I didn't know was huge, and the struggle you had to make to catch up, you know.
Mm-hmm.
And the one area that was highly deficient was in math, the other allied math courses.
Science.
Yeah, we had that, but very little of it. And weak as all get out when I got to BU. I mean, the untold hours I spent studying, just to regurgitate this stuff back on tests, which basically they were doing at that time. They was shifting from prose to multiple choice. So, if we had to write it out and use our own thoughts, probably would have failed miserably. But when you use multiple choice, you kind of get a sense of what the right answer is going to be if you've done any.
You can use intuition.
Yeah.
Guess at it. Yeah.
So that was tough. Now law school was immensely easier because everything was, you recorded it in your brain or in your notebooks, and you studied it over and over, and you had to give it back in your own words. So you could make it up, you could express yourself, and you could get it out there. So that was a lot better for me. I think the most outstanding person at Palmer was the English instructor, and I think that the leader impressed me with the ability and to stand on your own 2 feet and speak spontaneously and impromptu. And Palmer she really pushed that, and so every kid there learned how to jump up and think for themselves on their feet and say something.
Right.
Whether it was ultimately logical or otherwise, you had something to say.
But you gained the confidence to do that, which is a
exactly.
very challenging thing for.
And I say that they had a lot of pride, and it's interesting because the English instructor's name was Miss Pride. But if somebody screwed up in class and didn't get it, we had to go back to school that night, go back to class that night, until we were sure that person had it.
Right.
So they built a camaraderie around each other, and if somebody didn't get it, you're not moving forward until we
Help the whole
them
class.
to get over.
Right.
Yep. So that was good.
Mm-hmm.
At BU, I was alone, totally alone. Nobody told me that you could go see professors, and you go to their offices and sign up so you can talk to them if you needed guidance or help. Nobody said that there were guidance counselors that I could consult with. Never was. Well, they didn't put their arm around you. School was just too darn big. I'm sure that there were kids who came from other schools who were indoctrinated into or told what they should expect when they got to universities, use the professors.
Mm-hmm.
I never knew that until much later in life. I'd graduated and gone.
Mm-hmm.
So I never felt a warm feeling about my college
Mm-hmm.
because I felt like I did it all on my own.
Right.
And in a large sense, I did. Later on in life, I got older and realized that, it was a very supportive environment. They didn't extend themselves to me, but I got to know a lot of people on my own and learn and get support from them too.
Was the size of the school a bit intimidating?
Yeah, it was
because
very
you came from a really small.
Yeah, to a school of
preparatory school.
25,000 during the day and
right.
another 15,000 at night.
Yeah, that must have been quite an adjustment for
it was
you.
big.
Yeah.
And you get your first grades back, and they're B minus, C minus, and you say, whoops, what did I do here? And that was kind of shocking.
So, did you find any professors that you really remembered as being, extraordinary and so forth?
In college, no.
Mm-hmm.
Well, I wouldn't say they weren't extraordinary, but they were competent. They were very good, some of them.
Mm-hmm.
But I paid attention primarily to those that I cared about, and I think the professors I remember the most were in law school. Many of those guys were absolutely brilliant, and you could be called on. Mr. Lockhart, you got to stand up. And now in the case of Davis versus Wardwell, the Justice so-and-so says on page 157 of second of Illinois statutes or Massachusetts statutes, volume number 2, and he'd cite something, and you'd say, now, what do you have to say to that? And if you knew what you were talking about, he would expect you to say, well, on page 147 of that opinion, by the dissenting judge, he said so and so and so. Sit down. Excellent. Very often they didn't say excellent. They didn't say good, bad, or indifferent, but you knew when it was acceptable.
Right.
Yeah.
They let you go a little bit instead of coming down on your case.
Well, you knew they were on your case because they would interrupt you and wouldn't let you finish and would say, thank you very much. No, they wouldn't. They would just simply call on somebody else while you were in the middle of a sentence. That would let you know that you didn't know what you were talking about.
That was the unwritten.
So you meekly sat down, and everybody else is sitting there going, ooh.
That's what's going to happen to me. So, what would you describe as the worst crisis in your life? And did you learn anything that you can suggest to others who might have to endure a crisis?
I don't know. I had a lot of tough things happen in my life, but I don't think anything was a real crisis. I can't think of a crisis that I had to personally deal with. No, I don't.
What about one of the things that a lot of people will allude to is the death of a loved one, death of a parent? Has that?
Yeah, well, that didn't happen too often because most of the deaths in my immediate family were pretty much at a point where they could have been expected. They were at that age. I guess my mother was probably the youngest, she was only 68, but it wasn't a surprise. My mother was had joined in marriage with a guy who was a drinker and a chain smoker, and she adopted the same habits. So none of that contributed to her
To her health.
And,
Right.
we saw her decline.
From a
Smoking-
distance,
smoking too
which
much,
made it a
drinking
crisis.
Too much,
Right,
yeah.
right.
But that wasn't a crisis. It was stressful, but to be expected. I'll give you an example. When I went to see my mother at the last time before she died, we were in the hospital in Sumter, and Mark was with me because I was afraid he'd never see her again. And she held my hand almost like your spouse would if she was delivering a baby. I mean, she's squeezing my hand and it was hurting. And she pulled me down and I got my ear next to her mouth and she said, "Get me a cigarette." And Mark said, "You're not going to do that." I said, "Yes, I am." I said, I gave him some money. I said, "Go down. This is her dying wish." And he went to the store. I lit the cigarette, gave it to her. She puffed on it 2 or 3 times. And she had a smile on her face. And she died right after, not that night, but soon after, like the next morning. But it was her dying wish. I knew it wasn't good for her, but it didn't matter at that point.
At that point, it wasn't going to
matter.
change anything
No,
not to do it.
no.
Right. That's right.
Yeah.
Any general coping mechanisms you can suggest for dealing with
Well, I don't
problems?
know. A lot of that is personality and character traits and all kinds of things. It's a combination of both. One of my traits is, some people call it a strength, I guess. When crisis hit, I try to stay calm. When everybody's running around, going, "Yeah!"
Frantically, yeah.
I'm sitting there saying, I need space, quiet, so I can think.
Right.
And I think that's one of the reasons both of my wives have felt that was an asset. Because when things happen in the family, they say, "You're always steady." I don't know how you can sit there and just, I said, "Honey, you got to think it out."
Steady hand.
Yeah.
Right.
And it's all right to do what you're doing, but you can't think when you're running around all excited.
That's right. Right.
And so that's been one thing. Bill was kind of like that in a lot of ways. And I admired him for it. I mean, he faced a lot of stuff in his life.
Exactly.
But when you're a lawyer, you learn that you can't get emotional because you're representing other people. You have
You got to show
their
that.
assets,
Yeah.
their lives at stake, and you can't be all over the place. You've got to be a steady anchor, and they have to have trust in you that you are going to be a thoughtful,
right.
steady person
That's right.
who's going to think clearly.
It's the mark of a leader.
Yeah. And when you're trying cases and the judge makes a bad ruling for you, you can't get excited. You got to keep your cool all times.
Right.
Yeah.
I remember Mandela was explaining a story about how he was on a plane and there was some kind of engine trouble, and there were other people on the plane, and he was just acting like nothing was happening, and ignoring it and being calm, whereas people were kind of frantic.
Yeah.
And so he said when he walked off the plane, he was like, in reality, he was scared to death, but he didn't want to show it.
Exactly.
He said, "I wouldn't be a good leader if I
right.
showed my fear."
That's right.
So, how did you meet your spouse, and what are the key elements of a successful marital relationship?
Well, I met my spouse. I walked into a room where she was with 2 other charming women, I guess. I never got to say hello to them. I didn't care. When I saw Ruth, I laid eyes on her. I didn't want to talk to anybody but her. I did my best to get her out of that room and away from those people so we could spend time privately together.
And she didn't know you from Adam, man.
No, she didn't. I didn't know her either. I was
She
dumbstruck.
said, "Who is this guy?" You know.
I was dumbstruck. I said, "Man, this is,
Love at first sight.
you know, she was talking and like she loves to do, you know,
Yeah.
and gesticulating and being witty and pretty and whatever." And I said, I walked her. I was at a barbecue. I said, after I introduced myself to her, I said, "Would you like to go with me to get some barbecue?" I couldn't think of anything else to say. She said, "Sure." I guess she was tired of the other girls. So she said,
Right.
"Well, this is an opportunity." She was visiting
Right. Right.
Chicago from Detroit. And we talked for 4 hours, man.
On the initial meeting.
Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah. And I mean, both of us, neither one of us is a petty talker, as you well know. So,
Got that right.
yeah.
So then going forward, you two have really built a wonderful relationship. What would you say are the key ingredients that others should know about in terms of relationships?
Well, one is my wife taught me how to be witty and make fun out of a lot of things, make light of a lot of things, so that you can get through even serious issues. And she's just extraordinary at that. She was very good at it. That's why people love her, you know. Ruth is quick-witted and smart, and so she's always got a comeback or a quip or
she's got a
comment.
a sharp opinion.
That was her strength, you know.
Right.
And so I've always loved her for that. Ruth walks into her room, everybody goes, "Hey, Ruth," you know.
Yeah.
I'm saying, "Hey, I'm here too." Yeah, she got the appellation Dr. Ruth, you know, for years. When she'd go with me to tailgate parties. Because
Oh, okay. Oh,
she
yeah.
She would hold forth to the
Right.
tailgate.
Solve everybody's problems, right?
Yeah.
So in a relationship, when there is differences of opinion, how are they easily resolved? Or maybe they're not easily resolved, right?
Well, I got a great example.
Especially when you got two very strong personalities, right?
Yeah, I got a great example how she resolved stuff. We moved to California, and of course the move we thought was going to be financially rewarding. It turned out to be almost a disaster because we bought a house, and we found out we couldn't buy much less than what we bought because we couldn't live in something less than what we were exposed to and had before. But in California, the prices were through the roof. So we bit the bullet and bought it. And then Mark's going off his last year at Latin. He's going off to Yale. And so we got all these bills. So I come home one night, and she manages everything like most women do, wives do. And so we have dinner, and she then comes down and she takes the checkbook. And she says, she throws it over where I am, and she says, "I'm through with this. You can figure out how to make ends meet. You do it. I'm not going to wrestle this anymore. I'm tired of management." But anyway, it leveled us out to the point that we realized that we had to manage better.
Right.
Had to figure out how to do that. I had to figure out how to control our costs better, you know, and my costs, because she was living very frugally, you know. She would say, "Jesus, I'm spending as little as I can," you know.
Right.
We got two growing boys, and when they're here, they're eating up the house and home, you know.
Exactly.
But
she was dealing with it every day, and
Yeah.
she saw the issues there, you know,
yeah.
very close at hand.
Yeah, I think Ruth has always been unique. You know, one of the things that happened was when we moved to California, that was a traumatic move. It's a total different environment, different culture in California than from staid Midwestern Illinois.
Different weather.
And different weather. Everything was different. We lived in a town now. We lived in the city in Chicago amongst blacks, principally, a very elegant, upscale neighborhood. And we moved to now a isolated, totally white community.
Yeah.
And we moved there because we've been told the educational system was much
that
higher.
was that Moraga the first
Moraga,
place? Moraga, yeah, right.
And
A long commute to work.
Yeah. And that I was leading up to something. It was very, very stressful in a lot of ways because
The move. Yeah.
Yeah. What was the question?
The question was about just dealing with the marital issues and change. And
Yeah.
so,
Well, Ruth had the wisdom to, when we moved there, to develop a couple of things that the family should do that I never thought would come out of her, because she'd never done it. She decided that we should go camping. She said, "Hey, we got one of the world's grandest mountain chains right here, one of the greatest resorts to go to up there to camp out in the Sierras." And she started me to start working on, planning those trips. And we'd go up there, and the radio was no good, no phones. So it was a chance to focus on your family
Right.
and spend time with them, just walking the trails and talking.
No distractions.
Exploring nature. It was wonderful. And she insisted, we did that for years. When we came up to your
Yeah,
place.
you had already perfected the art.
Yeah.
Yeah. By the time you got up to Oregon. Yeah.
The other
exactly.
thing she would do is, she obviously recognized my work was stressful, developing a new department, the challenges of working in that environment. So she knew that Ruth would do research on unique places to visit in California. And on Friday I'd get home, and she said, "Be home by noon or 1 o'clock or something like that if you can." And we'd take off in the car. She'd have it arranged for either Sarah or somebody to keep the kids, and we'd go off just for maybe one night stands or 2 nights for the weekend. She'd find this unique historical factor about something, the hotel or the town.
That made it extra
And-
appealing.
yeah.
In addition to the scenery, especially in
Exactly.
California.
And we'd visit all these little places, and we had so much fun because we had a chance to just focus on each other,
Sure.
other than
Think-
kids, tuition,
Exactly.
taxes.
Issues. Yeah. Right.
Yeah, she did that brilliantly, and that was a lot of fun. We discovered we discovered ourselves better, but we also discovered California and a whole lot of stuff.
That's
it was
right.
just very exciting, very interesting.
Discovered ways to strengthen your relationship
Yeah.
in the context of the beauty of the
Right,
nature of California.
And she
Yeah.
found some very exquisite places for us to
To go to.
and stay. It was
Right.
wonderful.
She did the homework.
Yeah, yeah.
Okay, these are broad questions that we'll wrap this thing up with. What 3 ideas would you like to convey from your life experiences to the next generation and your grandchildren that would enrich their life?
I think first and foremost is knowing where you're going in life, where you want to go. It gives you a target and a goal to work toward. And it may not be the only one, but at least have a target or 2 or 3. That helps to guide you, helps define how you prepare for your life, and it makes life, getting there, a little easier, I think. I think knowing where I wanted to go kept me on track.
Having a specific goal.
Yeah. I mean, like when I ran into the crisis with my dad, I wasn't about to let that interrupt my
Because you already had your goal in
I knew
place.
where I wanted to go.
Right.
Yeah.
Right. Without that, you could have easily faded out
Oh, yeah.
and dropped out. Right.
I could have done like the guy I was living on his fire escape. He just dropped out of school, got a job,
Right.
and
Right.
he's done much or nothing since.
Exactly.
You know,
Exactly.
little jobs
exactly.
here and there, and survived. He survived, but he could have been. I mean, after all the money his parents invested in his education, he could have
Okay.
gone much farther.
So having a goal. Okay. What
Right.
about another concept for your grandchildren and future generations? That because it's very clear from all the things you've been saying so far that you've had a very enriched set of experiences in life with all sorts of folks and all kinds of places even. So you have something to say to them that they could really benefit.
One of the things that they need to understand is that you don't waste friendships and relationships. And it may sound crass, but you use them when they're beneficial to you. And a lot of people are and will be helpful. And it requires being open.
And it's two-way.
Yeah, exactly. But you can't be closed. You got to talk to people about things, if you think somebody has a common interest in a certain area, just talk to them about it, because your concern and whatever, see what they do. It's striking how often you'll find out they too have a same issue or something similar, and are willing to share that with you, and it'd be helpful in guiding you to move on, or helping you make a decision about where you should go or what you should do. One of the things I've learned that's been of immense help to me is when I got older, I was very open. Most people when I was a kid, if they had an illness, they wouldn't tell anybody. They wouldn't discuss it with other people. I have learned so much from friends and peers by just simply talking about different things that I'm experiencing, about illnesses and cures and whatever. And you learn, I've even learned about people who are working on cures and who are close to it, think they're close to it.
Right.
For Parkinson's and stuff like that.
Scientists.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And my friends who serve on the board of this bioscience company that's doing that.
Right.
So they're keeping me abreast of what's
Of
developed.
the progress and how soon they're going to have.
And get it through FDA.
Yeah, exactly.
Get it out there so we can test it. And so that's another thing that I think is very important. And utilizing your contacts wherever you go. It's really important. And to keep them, that's important.
Right.
You find somebody that's significant, interesting, and that you can relate to, don't let the relationship die.
Right. Culture it. Nurture it.
Cultivate
Nurture it.
it, yeah.
Nurture
Absolutely.
it. Nurture it.
Yeah.
Right. Okay, any third idea for your grandchildren?
Well, the most important thing is to stay healthy.
Okay.
It really is. And I think you would agree with that.
Yes.
Staying healthy is number one.
I resonate very strongly with that.
I mean,
Right.
people that have endured medical or health crises and still survive, but it's tough. And staying healthy is really important.
Yeah.
And that means exercise, diet, positive thinking. One of the things I discovered at the University of San Francisco, the hospital, is that they have a department that focuses an oncology area on diet and mental attitude to cure cancer. And they have experience with patients who've actually gone into remission without treatment.
Yeah, that's an alternative medical
Yeah.
approach that has some validity, apparently. Yeah.
You've heard of it.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah,
I've heard of, well, there's a whole spectrum of alternative medicine
Right.
that where they apply a lot of non-conventional means
Right.
of dealing with illnesses, and a lot of them have been passed down for thousands of years as well, and they have a lot of efficacy, in terms of getting a good outcome, So I wouldn't close, even in the spectrum of health care, I wouldn't close your mind to those options.
No.
Although some of them may sound a little, how should we say, untenable or sort of that really won't work. Hey, it might be good to.
When you got a highly regarded medical institution that you know.
Right. UCSF is world class.
That.
Right. And they wouldn't have folks on their staff who are charlatans.
Yeah, exactly. That's the word.
Exactly.
Yeah.
All right. So, what are your major concerns for the world of the 21st century, and what solutions do you propose? It's a big question.
Oh, that's huge. You got time for that?
Yeah, I got plenty of time. We got power here and everything. Do you have the time? I mean, you don't have to make it a long answer. You can give me your. You can think about it a little bit.
I think number one, countries have to learn to respect each other, and that they are countries, and what I mean by that is that just because of their size and their physical power, they don't go around dominating the rest of the world. because that's short-lived, and it's not a good way to exist. You know, you exist like we do in our lives as neighbors by communicating, understanding each other, and getting rid of all the flack on the side, you know. That's the discussion we were having
Yeah.
yesterday. And, you know, that's what President Wilson was trying to do after the First World War with the United Nations, with the League of Nations, which was the precursor to the United Nations. And everybody just said, yeah, he's a professor, you know, the college presidents, so we'll let him play with that. But they really didn't give him a lot of support.
Right. Right. And it never passed Congress.
And then when we got to the United Nations, they built it in a terrible way. I mean, everybody's represented, but the screwy way the Security Council is set up is just nonsense. All this, veto that, you know.
Yeah.
And there's got to be a better structure for that. The other problem I have is that we spend all this billions of dollars to support an assembly where we can exchange ideas, but we don't follow them. They don't have a really important power to enforce them. We say they do, but they don't. A lot of these skirmishes could be settled if the United Nations had the power to go in and do it. But they're preempted by the United States, they're preempted by Britain, they're preempted by France.
The ones on the Security Council.
That's
right.
US,
Russia.
I started to say
USSR. Yeah, right.
And
And also the well, you can say the
all the
old
old powers.
Yeah, right.
Still in power.
That's right. That's right.
Still in power. And I mean, the crises in the Middle East are all Western world generated, pretty much.
Because of the borders they created after World War I.
Yeah,
That's right.
It's ridiculous.
And then you look at, you know, like talking about the Security Council, you look at small countries like Britain in terms of population and then their power in the Security Council as opposed to and India, which is not on the Security
Exactly.
Council. You know,
Nonsense.
you know,
Makes no sense at all.
right. So, any other issues that you think are on this century's, you know, docket that we gotta address?
I think the most important thing, we alluded to this earlier, is I think the most important thing from my perspective is that we as a race have to figure out how we can become independent economically on our own, how we can coalesce, build our own resources and our own institutions. I mean, very much like what the Jews do. I mean, they build their power bases off their own strengths, and then they can move out into the world and affect the world in any way they want to. I mean, they did it through the law, they've done it through medicine, they've done it through communications. I mean, Jews developed Hollywood and controlled what you and I are thinking, subtly, just little bits by
In a
little
nuanced way.
Yeah.
In a nuanced way.
And communications, they realized communications is important. Having an impact on the law is important.
And the fact that they've gotten such an enormous amount of influence and support for Israel, which, by analogy, we should have a comparable support for Africa.
Absolutely.
For many of the African countries
I mean,
where we came from, you know.
most American people are afraid to even say anything that would suggest they were criticizing Israel.
That's right.
They're scared.
Yeah.
They're scared to say it.
Right, that's right.
That's a strong position.
Whereas you have opposing parties in Israel that are critiquing like
Exactly,
crazy
exactly,
what's
all the
happening
time.
with the main government.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think that's one of the most important issues we've got to address and got to figure
Right,
it out.
to build the community of those of African descent.
Sure, it would be great if
Yeah.
somebody like Bill Clinton and Hillary and Obama and the rest would take that on. You know?
I would imagine that Obama's foundation, that he obviously, well, whatever, I think he had this think tank in the White House recently. You know about Gadwell and
Right.
Toni Morrison,
Right.
and they all sitting around gaming what he's going to do after the
Right.
presidency. And I'm sure that will be a big, you know, like the whole thing about African American males. That's
Right.
going to be one of their
Right.
major his major focus. And they've got already they're thinking $1 billion to start. You
Right.
know, so that's something going to be intriguing to watch. You know,
Yeah.
because he's going to obviously going to try to outdo Carter and all of the
Yeah.
all of the above, and take all of the lessons that he'll learn from the Clintons. You
Yeah.
know, on their
Isn't it
and
interesting?
they're doing a great job. The Clintons. You know.
Isn't it interesting that in the last 50 years, the only past presidents that have made an impact in our society as past presidents are the Democrats. The Republicans have done nothing. They've made no mark in the world to try to change anything, to try to help anything. They've just gone back to sit on their money and relax and enjoy life. But Carter, Clinton, and you can criticize them for what they do as if you're a conservative or a Republican, but they are making an impact.
I can add to that during the presidencies as well.
Yeah.
Not only afterwards,
Yeah.
but even during the presidency.
Exactly.
The Democrats have done more. One thing that startled me in terms of just a realization was that how many programs that came out of the U.S. government that had a social benefit for particularly the downtrodden or the marginal or even the middle class. How many of those programs were initiated and passed by Republican administrations?
Very few.
Very few.
Yeah.
And so, if any,
Yeah.
the only ones
Well,
that I was talking with Spencer
Nesbitt
about.
I was telling you about, that
What?
concept was created during the Nixon administration.
Okay.
That's the only one.
The one,
that I can think
the
of.
one that the other one is that just the reform of the welfare system during the Clinton administration. So we can give him credit, but it was also a bipartisan effort, with the Republican Congress.
Reagan was so bad, he didn't even know who his black secretary was. Secretary of his cabinet.
Mm-hmm.
And when he met
Could-
the man, he said, "Well, who are you?" I mean, that's embarrassing.
Yeah,
You know?
yeah, exactly. Okay, so we almost finished here. What would you like to be remembered most for by future generations in your family? You, James Blakely Lockhart.
Well, remember this. Once my ashes are in the ground or I'm burned, the memory of me won't be long. After my wife dies and my kids are gone.
Why do you say that?
Well, because generations don't know you, the next generation, unless you've left a huge mark in society. Monumental. People like Martin Luther King and the presidents and scientists, Nobel Prize winners will be remembered because they're memorialized. But you and I aren't going to be...
But you mentioned you wrote a bio. That's a way in which they will know you to a certain extent. And maybe that's one of the vehicles in which you can convey those things that would have them, have some remembrance of you. I mean, don't underestimate your accomplishments in life that could be, inspiring for the future generations. And the point is that, you have accomplished considerable, more than you might
I don't know. I
suggest.
think more emphasis on it. In reality, I think in the large scheme of things, not in our sense, that what you and I have done is what's expected of us. It's not earth-shaking by any means. It's not going to be memorialized for 100 years or something.
Maybe within your family.
Well, possibly. But you see, our kids, they're going to do stuff that's way beyond what we've done.
That's our dream and hope, right?
I mean, look at what Corey's doing and Spencer. I mean, it's really wonderful what they're achieving. And their kids are going to do some stuff, I mean, we wake up 25 years from now and Chase is going to, who knows what Chase is going to be? Chase is going to be out there.
Yeah, absolutely.
And Tara, his daughter, she's an interesting artist and intellect, and she she could be all over the place in 20 years if she hits, gets the right breaks. You just don't know.
Yeah. But I will be very, straightforward with you. You will be well remembered. Don't worry. In many ways. Yeah. Well, I'm talking about within the family, and I think one of the reasons why that will happen is because of we can focus back on education, the fact that we achieved a certain level of education, and we've demonstrated how important education is for having a fruitful life and a productive life, and so that'll be an inspirational model, because we are among the first generation to get an extensive education, college and beyond, and so forth, and that is something that will be looked back on. Say, well, okay, they did it back in the 20th century. Why can't we do it? Okay. Describe your favorite 5 books of literature or nonfiction, if you can.
Oh, I think the most impressive book is the one I got to remember the name of it. Done by this law professor, which encapsulates the 3 lawsuits that ultimately came Brown versus Board of Education. You read that book, haven't you? It has all the details about Delaney and Thurgood Marshall, and it alludes to your dad. It doesn't name him, but I think Bill Bennett's mentioned in it. I forget the book. I've got it. I haven't seen it or read it in years, but it's a brilliant tome.
Who's the author?
A law professor. I'll have to tell you.
Okay.
You know it. We've talked about this before. But it's really the first monument to our family, because Bill's mentioned in it. And all of the guys that we know.
Sure.
And Thurgood. I have to get that.
Somehow that book has escaped my reference, so I really will get that from you later.
Yeah,
okay. Any others? Or?
That's a principal book.
I mean, you're well read. You've read a lot of books.
No,
So.
I'm not that. I haven't read a lot in the last few years. I spent a time watching golf and sports, basketball, football. Yeah.
Enjoying the athletic.
I think the most interesting book I ever read when I was young, I read a lot. Because my mother used to belong to Reader's Digest. And we used to get books every month, and I'd read them. But I didn't absorb them as much as I thought I would. But I think that Moby Dick stuck with me.
Okay.
The symbolisms.
Sure.
Everything. Everybody knows what it teaches. I mean, it's a giant book.
Metaphor.
Yeah.
A huge book.
Metaphor on life, man. That was an awesome book.
And very well written.
Yeah.
By Herman Melville. Yeah. It's a classic of American literature.
Yep.
Any African American authors that you have been particularly touched by? I've not read a lot of African American literature. Read some, but not a great deal. Like Richard Wright, those guys.
See, I read all that stuff a long time ago.
Well, yeah, that's when I'm not
But I just
necessarily.
don't remember it.
I'm not.
I'd have to read it again.
I'm not necessarily referring to books you read in the last month, but just over the years, what has influenced you?
I don't know. I can't name any right now.
Okay, when I get the I tell you what.
Roland Powell's books were very
Was good.
impressive.
His biography, his autobiography. Yeah. So there is. So I'll add that, but you give me.
There's a book on W.E.B. Du Bois that I love.
Okay.
And
is that the one that won the Pulitzer Prize? It's a huge.
Yeah, I have that at home. I
Right.
read that from front to back. I mean, that was a very impressive book. He was a hell of a
Yeah,
guy.
yeah. There is the giant intellect
I
of,
mean,
of
This guy was huge.
yes,
If he existed today, he'd be the dominant person around.
absolutely,
He was an intellect that used to challenge everybody.
exactly,
I
exactly.
mean, there were no way people were as smart as that.
And
man.
he's made an impact over the years in terms of the trajectory of African Americans.
But you know, Thurgood Marshall was with Charlie Houston were two incredible minds. They strategized how to handle all these situations,
Bring it to the courts.
every aspect of the civil rights movement. You know, just deciding it was
Where to go
when
next?
which issue to tackle. They knew they couldn't tackle them all,
Right.
and they knew they had to achieve what would get them to make the greatest leap forward.
Right. Right.
I mean, they had all kinds of cases sitting
Give
on
them the
their
most
desk.
leverage.
Exactly.
Say, what could you focus on with minimal resources and get the broadest impact?
Brilliance of putting all those cases together and preparing for them was awesome.
Yeah. Yeah. Absolutely.
Yeah.
What is your definition of happiness?
Oh man, having my family around, being loved, I hope.
We all hope.
Yeah.
Right. Right.
Yeah, having 4 grandchildren, a beautiful wife, and two great boys, and all the rest of the family around. You know, Spencer and Corey and Richard Foster and all these guys. I mean, they've done very well. I'm very happy with them, and you know, they're like my sons. They spent many years with us,
Yes. Yes.
and I've had somewhat of a small influence on their lives and decision
Maybe.
making.
Maybe a little more than a small influence.
Spencer's been a big brother to both of my boys. You know? He took more stuff than anybody.
From the time he went to the University of Wisconsin, you know,
Yeah.
and he was coming down to Chicago to visit,
they
right?
respected him, they loved him, and
yeah.
he was there for them, you know. Yeah. My particular parish was in a highly intellectual area. University of Chicago had a great theological school, and the professors there were angling to speak at the church on Sunday, you know, to deliver the sermon, and it was all it was professorial, and you know how professors are.
Yes.
They're not going to just say, believe in God. They're not saying any of that.
They're going to give you a rational
They're
argument.
going to give you a rational argument. They're going to tell you both sides of the issue.
That's right. That's
Yeah.
right.
And make you think about it.
That's right. They give you food for thought.
Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. Which is, I think, one of the things.
And remember also, when I was at BU, I was influenced by Howard Thurman. Howard Thurman was a giant,
Oh, yeah.
and he was dean of the chapel.
That's right.
And we used to get up late because we were partying late on Saturday night, and we'd stand outside in the pure abject cold. They had to put speakers outside because the chapel wasn't that big.
Right.
And Martin, of course, got in, and a few other people like him got inside.
Yeah.
Stand out there.
Yeah, he's a legend. He's a legend. Howard Thurman.
Howard
Yeah.
Thurman's words were that far apart, but you hung on every one of them.
That's right. That's right.
He was a brilliant speaker and a brilliant thinker.
That's right. On the line of, you know, in the same, how should we say, class as Mays.
Yeah.
Benjamin Mays.
Oh yeah, Mays was
Another one of those
We
giants.
used to get up at what, 4 o'clock in the morning, 5 o'clock to drive to Orangeburg.
That's right.
to
For
hear
the Easter
sunrise service.
That's right. What are your thoughts about ethics and morality in the modern world?
Let's do this on a follow-up.
Okay. Okay.
All right.
Okay. We'll
Let's
cut
go-
it.
let's
We'll
go
we'll
relax
turn
now.
it. We'll relax now
Yeah.
and.
Second